everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And we're coming at you with a festive episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast. I got my hot
Yeah,
chocolate,
I have cup.
but today
I have
we're
water.
coming at you with a very special episode. Those of you who watch us regularly, semi-regularly, and otherwise, you all probably are aware of the fact that 2024 has been a bit of a trial for us, managing to balance our lives with this YouTube channel, and thus we have not been able to cover 2024 as extensively as we have covered other years since this podcast properly began. And we decided to take advantage of that a little bit because normally what we do is an end of the year roundup where we talk about our favorite, collectively, albums of the year, songs of the year, our least favorite albums, least favorite songs, and that kind of thing. However, since we did not cover as much new music this year, it kind of loses a bit of the weight if a lot of the things aren't things we're calling back to or things we're referencing and whatnot. But we still want to share a lot of the experiences, talk about the things that we, have experienced this year. And now we are here with our favorite things of 2024. And the rules are for this list is that there are no rules. We are just talking about the things that have affected us the most this year that we experienced for the first time. We are keeping it mostly relegated to 2024-ish things, but my list, for example, has a lot of things that absolutely did not come out this year, but I experienced for the first time. I know there's probably bits and bobs of that elsewhere, but the vast majority of my list is still this. So I'll go with the most frivolous thing on my list here to talk about, in that I had an experience this year that I placed at the edge of my list, and that experience had to do with a musical artist, but had very little to do with an album in the traditional sense that we might classify it. And that would be, you see, a window into the life of Jake is that every once in a while, my girlfriend and I will head back to my old home, back a county away, and we will do laundry and what have you over at my mom's house. And then we'll just spend the afternoon there, and occasionally we will get a little bit wasted and watch something, have a little fun while we're doing laundry. And this year, we decided to, on one of our visits, get real hammered. And I mean really hammered. And I can't tell you why we did this, but we did a double feature of Jennifer Lopez's two movies that came out this year. The documentary of her making her new album and that celebrates her marriage to Ben Affleck. And then the Dave Meyers directed music video bonanza that is the This Is Me, This Is Now, whatever the fuck this thing is called, because I can't be bothered to remember, but I can tell you this much. Watching these two movies right after each other with Rhiannon, drunk as fuck, watching the ego of one of our least deserved pop stars explode in front of me, and it was glorious. I recommend everyone watch these. Intoxicated, asterisk.
Under
Yeah,
no circumstance.
Well,
I will never do this.
I'm a little young. I think we were all probably a little young to fully
oh yeah.
appreciate J Lo's peak of cultural relevance and what she meant culturally. I have vague memories of, Jenny from the Block stuff when I was a very young child, but I never really got a sense or developed a kind of like artistic relationship, for lack of a better word, with anything Jennifer Lopez ever did, in the same way as a lot of her contemporaries. So she's kind of a vacuum to me. Like I don't really get her. So this is fascinating to me that I didn't know. I think I heard about one of these documentaries being a thing, but I didn't know there was two, and I did not know one of them was about.
Ryley, you specifically would probably get a real kick out of the documentary specifically because it is framed around it's like it's trying to insist upon itself into a comeback. Like it's like, oh, this is her big moment. Like, oh, she's with Ben again. And like Ben Affleck is an aside in this documentary that gets cut to like 10 times. And he's always just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they go back to doing exactly what the rest of the movie is. It's a hoot.
She was J Lo, but now she's J High.
I mean, that's kind of the level that we're working with here. And if you don't know who Dave Meyers is, if you're wondering who's responsible for all of the worst music videos to come out in the last like 10 or so years, like that one weird ass music video for I think it's Adore You by Harry Styles where he like falls in love with a fish. Yeah, that's Dave Meyers. So all of these music videos are completely fucking unhinged. Just like the most bizarre shit you have ever seen and you're just like this came from Jenny from the block, huh? Okay.
I've always kind of wanted to watch that movie Jiggly that like she and Ben Affleck
Oh,
are in.
you
You
mean
know, that's like,
Geely? It's pronounced like really.
oh, I didn't know that.
It
That's,
is. He's
You
correct.
should. It should definitely be called Jiggly though.
I mean, no,
I mean,
I'm not gonna disagree with that. I just wanted to be pedantic about it.
oh, I'm glad you were. That's perfect. I like Jiggly better personally, or
Hmm.
I think
We all do.
I think how I said it was Jiggly because I'd heard
I, I'm never gonna think about it another way from now on.
um Jigglypuff. Yeah. August, throwing to you then. If you want to, either whether you want to go straight to your number five or if you have honorable mentions, however you want to do it, kick us off.
So I do not have any sorts of honorable mentions, but my number five, I decided I wanted to go like a little bit off the beaten path with this and talk about the release of a set of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, that being Phantom Nightmare, that it was released on February 9th of this year, obviously. And this was a set that introduced primarily so far as metagame relevance goes. This was the set that introduced the new series of Yubel cards, Spirit of Yubel, Samsara D Lotus, and I think Nightmare Pain. Also released the newest wave of Raid Raptor cards, Noir Lanius, Bloom Vulture, and Rising Rebellion Falcon, and as well as Brave Strix, but most importantly to competitive play, uh, Promethean Princess Bestower of Flames, as well as Snake Eyes Poplar.
How many of
And
these are going to be on the final exam?
oh, don't you worry. Very
Oh,
many,
buddy.
very many. But no, so the reason I wanted to talk about this set was it was a way that I ended up getting my friend, a friend of mine, Tristan, kind of back into playing the game. And he, in particular, took interest in the newer Raid Raptor cards. I was playing with some of the Snake Eyes stuff. And I mean, for one, this was a set that kind of warped a lot of how the game throughout the entire year has been played. And only as of the recent December 9th Forbidden Unlimited list update that the Snake Eyes, Yubel, and later released in, I believe it's the set after this, the Infinite Forbidden, the Tenpai Dragon cards, finally saw themselves wane out of metagame relevance. But beyond just the immense competitive impact this set had, it was one I found very fun to play around with in its respective format. This was when I was attending local Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments at the highest frequency I ever had. It was when I was playing the physical card game at the most I ever have, as well as just being invested the most in digital simulators like Yu-Gi-Oh Master Duel. So in general, I just found this set to be a big positive step forward in terms of me getting invested in the kind of getting some semblance of investment in the game, having someone who I could actually play the game with who could kind of keep up with the game's immense complexity and power creep over uh, now 25 years of existence. So yeah, that's I would have to say that's why I find this set so enjoyable without going into too technical of detail that would just bore our audience to death completely. But yeah, so Yu-Gi-Oh's Phantom Nightmare set lands a high placement for me, both in terms of being a fun set to open as well as a fun set to play.
I still think it's kind of awesome how these games like Yu-Gi-Oh and whatnot are still played competitively and still like have an active metagame that's even like keep kept tabs on. Like I have not kept up with TCG as much as I probably should have, considering how into it I used to be as a kid with games like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, but like it's just kind of cool that those communities are still like kept aloft just because it's like it's at this point it's so far away from when those things were like uber popular that it's maintained by like really big fans, people who like really give a shit about this kind of stuff. So that's awesome. I should take a look at some of this shit. Maybe I could get back into one of these.
Morgan, over to you.
I'm gonna just do my 10 honorable mentions as fast as I can. Number 10, Dune Part 2. I realize that it's probably wicked, but to me, this is the film event of the year. Um,
Oh yeah.
It's like how to me the Glass Beach album is one of the best albums of the year, but no one remembers it because it came out in January. People have just unfortunately moved past these things too quickly.
the kind of film we'll be talking about for decades. Number 9, Chapel Roan's Good Luck, Babe. Again, I realize that it's probably not like us, but this is the pop song of the year for me.
I
Um,
completely agree with you there.
I would also co-sign that that song is amazing.
just I have heard and quite like Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess. This is so much better than anything on that album by such a ridiculous margin that it's difficult to fathom. Stellar work. She needs to drop another album so we can stop talking about her in the public eye. Number 8, Metaphor Refantasio. Probably would be higher if I had gotten more than 10 hours into it. Some of a bitch is like 90 hours long, and it just didn't 100% get its hooks in me like I thought it would. Still, such, I mean, it's just brilliant. And I haven't heard a negative word about this game, even from people who have put the requisite amount of time in it to beat it. Um, so it would probably be higher up even if I had, if it would probably be higher up if I had put the time into it. But as it stands, very cool. 7, The Bear season 3, the weakest of the 3 seasons, still the best show on television. Number 6, the Don to Don OP. I haven't seen the show.
Oh
That's
yeah.
that's that's one of the most incredible pieces of animation I've ever seen in my life. And
God, isn't it amazing?
go that song goes absolutely ballistic.
Yeah, I
Um,
gotta watch that show.
Number 5, Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. I didn't need more Elden Ring. I'm glad I got more. And it's the best part of the game. So, what are you gonna do? Number 4, Silent Hill 2 remake. I've waxed poetic about this on this podcast. Everything I say stands. It's maybe gotten even a little better in my estimation. 3, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, which for the uninducted, I guess, is Yakuza 8.
Has a ridiculous title, doesn't it?
Yeah. Eh, The so Yakuza 7 and Yakuza 8 are the best JRPGs since Persona 5. Um, and before that, since Final Fantasy 9, probably. It's such a complete revelation to me what they were able to do with this franchise. Where in one fell swoop they introduce a new character, a new protagonist that's as good as the previous protagonist, close out the previous protagonist's story in an incredibly satisfying way, create the best semi-traditional turn-based combat system I've experienced in a video game, and maintain exactly the level of heart and hijinks that the rest of the series had, and frankly, even kind of improved upon it. Number 2, Foxing self-titled. Also have waxed poetic about this on this podcast. Album of the year remains that way. Uh, I can't imagine anything taking its spot. And the last one I'll shout out is Tekken 8, which is the first fighting game that I have actually gotten into since those games were online. So kind of missed out on Street Fighter 4 because just for whatever reason I did. But that was where fighting games came back to life. And everything since then have been I've dabbled in a good handful of them and nothing has grabbed me in the way that Tekken 8 did. And that is including Tekken 7. Just an all-around essentially perfect work of fighting game engineering. It's real good. And I guess just to keep us all on the same page, I will do my number five, which is in the same vein as Metaphor Refantasio, Persona 3 Reload. I think this is sort of what's held me at an arm's length from Metaphor, is that there's an overwhelming feeling of I just played this game,
Yeah.
in the sort of cycle of the way of the game loop and the way all of that works, which is not a fair comparison, or not necessarily a comparison, but it's not necessarily a fair thing to levy at the game. And I just wish they hadn't come out within a 10-month period of each other. But alas, Persona 3 Reload, I often said that if they made Persona 3 again with as much of a budget and as much care and love and in the gameplay style of Persona 5, then that version of Persona 3 would be my favorite game of all time. This was not the case, as it turns out. I think in retrospect, especially playing this version that's super souped up, it points out the extraordinary pacing problems that Persona 3 has in its first two acts. In the sense of like, I played the first two acts of this remake and was like, this is great. This is not the life-changing experience I remember having with Persona 3. And then I got to the third act and was like, oh, there it is. It's a very much unperfected form of a Persona game that probably still, it definitely has the best ending of any of them. The road getting there is a little rocky, but that said, my number five experience of the year, just a dream come true, really.
Well, for me, in terms of honorable mentions, I'm gonna talk about music quite a bit in my top five. But since we're not doing a formal best albums of the year video, but we are going to be recapping the first half of the decade in an upcoming video, which look forward to that. I do want to just quickly shout out some albums, not necessarily like in a ranked order. I found that despite our infrequency in recording this year, we actually kind of did end up managing to talk about most of the albums I really love, like the most this year, which is nice. So I'll shout out some that I haven't had a chance to really talk about yet. Starting with Blade's Cold Visions. This I want to shout out just because I was really surprised by how much I liked this album, a lot more than I was expecting to. And by that I mean the fact that I like a Blade album at all is a surprise to me, let
You
alone that
know,
I think this one is really, really good. It has just inched its way up my list throughout the year. I want to shout out Chief Keef's Almighty So 2, which is a long-awaited sequel to one of Chief Keef's most beloved mixtapes. And I feel like this one didn't quite get the attention it deserved. I think that may partly be because it came out at a time when most of the internet was talking about, in the hip hop space, was talking about Kendrick Lamar and Drake, because I'm pretty sure that one came out in April. So it was in the middle of that beef cycle. So it ended up getting a little bit overlooked, but it's an incredible record. Sounds amazing and is just a lot of fun to listen to. I will also shout out Chat Pile's new album, Cool World. Of all the albums, again, we got to talk about a few albums in September and October that I really love, so I'm grateful for that. But of all the albums in the last few months we didn't get a chance to review, this is the one I love, like particularly. Well, one of the ones I love particularly is this one. I thought this album was sensational, a really great follow up to their debut album. Some really potent, ugly, visceral themes and ideas put forward here that if anything, land even better in 2024 than their first album did in 2022. This is just one of those albums that really meets the moment, in my opinion. Also, Father John Misty's Mahash Mashana. This, I think, is slowly grown to become maybe my favorite album of Father John Misty's. It's really tough between that and I Love You Honey Bear and God's Favorite Customer as well. Those three are kind of, I think every second, like every even numbered Father John Misty album for me is the one that knocks me out. It's been a consistent pattern, and this is like a really exceptional album that I really, really love. And Mount Erie's Night Palace is the other honorable mention I want to shout out because that album came out fairly recently and got a lot of love and attention from Mount Erie fans, but also feels like people have moved on from that already, more because I think it's such a heady, long-winded, dense piece of work that isn't super approachable. I don't think it's like super avant-garde or esoteric or anything. I think if you've enjoyed a Microphones album before, because to me it's got more in common with the Microphones than previous Mount Erie projects. If you've enjoyed any of that stuff before, this new album, Night Palace, is incredible. I just can't recommend it highly enough. It has basically, it's very current in terms of the things that it talks about, but it also functions musically as a little bit of a career summary of all the sorts of sounds that Phil Elverum has explored over the years. So there's something bittersweet about it that I really, really loved. My number five, in terms of my favorite things of the year, though, is, I mean, surprise, surprise, it's the Return of Los Campesinos. My favorite band. They have been away for a while, living family lives, having kids, being normal people outside of the world of music, and they came back in 2024. And it wasn't just that they came back with an album that I think is really one of the best albums of the year and an incredibly like masterful piece of work. It was the fact that they were so immediately embraced by the music press, by their audience, and also by I think some new people who weren't really familiar with them who came into them through this new album because of its positive reception. It got a Best in Music from Pitchfork, glowing reviews across the spectrum, and just to see them embraced so strongly and so quickly. Because the album's great, but really my number five is just this whole return itself and how celebrated it was, how triumphant it was, especially for a band that it felt like a year ago or so, most people who ever cared about that band kind of moved on from them. So to see that happen this year was really, really awesome. That's my number five.
In terms of my honorable mentions, the remainder is that I just kind of have a placeholder for film in 2024, just because I didn't. I'm slowly getting to the point in my life where I'm incredibly frustrated that I don't have enough free time to partake in all of the things that I want to partake in, but I still paid as close attention to film this year as I could have, and holy shit, did we get a cornucopia of amazing films. I mean, Morgan already mentioned Dune Part 2. My personal favorite movie of the year is still probably Luca Guadagnino's Challengers, which is maybe the most excited a movie has made me in like 2, maybe even 3 years. Um, so that was obviously like totally fucking incredible. There's been so much stuff. Like I recently watched The Substance with Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. That was a fantastic horror movie. If you like weird body horror shit, weird Cronenberg kind of shit, or Julia Ducournau, give that a watch. You'll have a damn good time. Or Brian Usna movies like Society. You'll have a decent time. Next is getting to see one of my favorite bands live, Slowdive. I basically have chronicled my growing love for Slowdive on this channel ever since I really, really got into them at the beginning of 2021. And they've been one of my favorite bands ever since. I love them, love all their records, and getting to see them at a small venue in Louisville with like the largest assembly of goth 20 somethings that has ever been collected in the state of Kentucky. I'm definitely sure about that. So that was fantastic. It was a great venue. It was a great show. They played like an amazing set list, absolutely phenomenal. Really good mix of all of their stuff. Even stuff from Pygmalion they played live, which they don't always do. So I was supremely lucky in that respect. The next entry on my honorable mentions list is just an album. And to make it a little bit more messy, is that it is an album that was released in this decade that I may or may not be talking about relatively soon. I haven't finalized my list yet, but who knows? But on the off chance that I don't talk about it, this would be an album that I discovered from 2020 that is from an artist called Methwitch. It is the technical debut album of Methwitch, Indwell. The reason I put this here is because this never left my rotation since I started listening to it at the beginning of the year, like to a degree where I'm like a little. Take one listen to this album and then you'll be like, yeah, listening to this for a prolonged period of time is probably a bad idea to both your ears and mental health. This is a grindcore, mathcore, new metal, thrash metal album, and is one of the most sonically ugly things I have ever experienced in my life. It is also a concept album about a man who is being possessed by a demon, and he is trying to exorcise it from him as the album goes along. And you get everything from worm rot style grindcore mashups to Dillinger Escape Plan style alt metal mathcore breakdowns to full on Linkin Park new metal serenades that sound as close to Chester Bennington as basically anything I've ever heard. If this sounds remotely interesting to you, I recommend experiencing it. Maybe not all in one sitting, just because it's a lot. It's a lot. So tread with caution. But I guess it tells you a lot about the kind of year that 2024 was that I deemed this such an imperative listen that it got its own entry on my honorable mentions list. And last of which is this is difficult to describe, the speculative science fiction novel All Tomorrows. Um, I mainly am an audiobook guy just because it's more convenient for me time-wise, but when I do sit down and read something, it's because it's damn good and damn important. And also the illustrations in which are pretty imperative to the overall experience. So, what is this? Is that All Tomorrows is essentially speculative science fiction about the
No shit, I read this
human
year.
evolutionary path and about how humans are speculated by this one author to evolve.
C.M. Kozman being that author's name because I literally read this week.
Wow, really? Holy
Yeah,
shit.
no shit.
Wow, okay. Well, the
I'll
awesome thing
interject
about
comments later. I'll let you finish.
awesome. I'm really glad just because this is kind of a tough sell to people, but it's speculative evolution that goes forward in the future hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. So to the point where this, speculative sci it's science fiction. It's based off of like real evolutionary science that like to like draw comparisons and stuff, but like this is speculative science fiction that becomes cosmic horror. And when I say it becomes cosmic horror, it's difficult to describe how, but the various branches of evolutionary paths that this novel details is like the first big splintering being like a war between the Earth and a colonized Mars, between how humans have evolved on Mars since its colonization and with humanity. And this war branches outward and eventually will spread its tendrils of different evolutionary paths for like billions of years, and you track them and see how they all evolve differently to the point where humanity evolves into these different species where like one of them encodes their consciousness into a robotic construct and they scientifically learn how to manipulate gravity, and they just like exist as these little like balls that go
And
around committing space genocide because they view all other forms of life as totally imperfect. And then there's this race of like ancient fucking sentient bug people called the Ku, and they come and wipe out basically like the entire fucking galaxy, and it's crazy, and only like tiny little sects of humanity survive that, and all of them grow out to different things. And it's just like, it's truly fascinating stuff. I know that a lot of this might sound like homework or biology to people who are like uningratiated, but like even just the way that this is written, it's a surprisingly uh at least for what it is, I found it a very accessible read, and it introduced me to a lot of ideas and hyperfixations, I guess, that like have dwelled within my mind ever since I found out about this story. It's truly fascinating in ways that I didn't even think fiction could be, honestly.
And what's so beautiful about All Tomorrows too is, and I think many of you who are listening can just interpret from Jake's description that there is really no central protagonist to this story. It's more just about this kind of progression of life, and as kind of stated multiple times throughout the book, the kind of importance and beauty of it is not kind of this, natural end point of death. It is kind of about the journey and the process and the wild kind of paths and tides that life takes you on. In a lot of ways, despite how grim and just gnarly, creepy, and weird it can get, there's this underlying sense of optimism and hope to the whole book that's just very almost unique with it. It's and that's the thing. I think your description of this just being so uh off kilter, bizarre, and like unique in the face of so much other science fiction, it can maybe make it a little tough to process at first. And hell, maybe it might even be just a touch repetitive with long stretches of the book just being dedicated to these detailed explanations of species. Although, yeah, it never crosses over into feeling like homework. And the other thing I think you cannot oversell about this book is how great the illustrations throughout are.
Yes. The illustrations accompanied with like what these different like races look like is basically like half the appeal. I would describe their relationship to the text as being as imperative as like the original illustrations to the scary stories to tell in the dark books are to those. Like it is an extension of the text that you need to absorb to be like there's like all these drawings which kind of look like they're sort of done in the style of like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, where they're like kind of graphed and diagrammed. It adds a certain sense of realism to it, but it also just like it helps you picture all of these insane foreign concepts that like you probably need a little bit of help with, just because like again it gets so insane that like when I said that this becomes cosmic horror, I'm not joking. This becomes like if you're familiar with science fiction stories, like the one that I kept coming back to is that really reminded me of Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Like there's so many beats from like that sort of like specifically absurd aspect of sci-fi horror that is just like it's really beautifully captured here. It's also done with a framing device that's really fascinating. That's like a completely alien creature is like trying to chronicle the history of mankind and is trying to like figure out what happened to them because they don't exist in a way that you can still tell they were mankind anymore. So they're like, did they disappear? Did they evolve to the point where they're unrecognizable? We're not sure. And it kind of leaves off on the note of just like, eh. But it's like again, it caused me to like think about fiction and stories in a way that I do not regularly, and I found that very valuable.
And yeah, the best part about it is you can't even really spoil it because just blatantly saying what the events are of the story does not do anywhere near close to justice of what the actual experience is.
Also, spoiler, everything that happens is genocide. Like, like that's every plot point in this story is that like, oh no, somebody genocided somebody else. Oopsie.
There's nothing quite like there's no more or less definitive end chapter point to periods of history and entire
It's
people
just
being
like,
kicked
well,
out.
we can't really go any further for obvious reasons. And to
Here's
to
the
cap
structure
off
of history.
this entire segment that's gone on way too long, is my number five, which is sort of an extension of Morgan, which is really just technically this
The Steam Deck.
Steam Deck. This little device here is a Steam Deck that I bought for 380 bucks, which honestly has proved to be one of the smartest purchase decisions I've ever had, just because I've been trying to find an excuse to get back into gaming just because it used to be such a pivotal part of my life, and as other mediums have sunk their tendrils into me over the last couple of years, that's been one I have to leave by the wayside because gaming is A, the most expensive hobby, and B, the most time consuming one. And this kind of helps with both of those, because if you're into PC gaming and you have Steam, you'll know that they have sales so regularly about on like basically everything in their library that amassing a collection of games on there is far easier than it is on consoles. I have like 40 games that I've purchased on here, and half of them have been for like less than $10, which has been imperative because I have been in financial dire straits this year because of an ambulance. Thanks, American healthcare system. But this device here has been invaluable to me because A, it helps me catch up with modern games that I either was not able to play before, and just like again, the world of PC games, specifically indie like PC horror games, has been something I've been trying to like ingratiate myself back into, which led me to finding my personal game of the year this year, which is an indie game by the name of Mouthwashing. If you are curious about it, it's also kind of cosmic horror, sort of, about a crew of people who get stranded basically in space, on a sort of journey transporting something from one place to another. And I will not talk that in depth about mouthwashing, A, because it's probably something we could talk about further in the future that just it deserves a thorough examination of its own, and I'm not even sure I'm the person to do that.
I was going to mention this game in my top five, but I decided that you would probably mention it first, so
Yeah,
I left it off.
it got me in two ways. The first way is that a lot of what the horror in mouthwashing is that a lot of it is the horror of immobility, the horror of chronic pain, the horror of seeing something exists whose existence is nothing but pure torment. And that in itself is a terrifying thing that you have to like absorb as like a reader or as a player of a game where you're just like confronted with an idea. But let me just say, after you've spent a long period of time confined to somewhere not of your own volition, a lot of the horror and mouthwashing begins to feel very different and very salient and hits very close to home. For people who I'm sure have suffered like medical, like I've actually like read people who have suffered from like really intense chronic pain and have described their experience with Curly and mouthwashing as being like one of just like overwhelming sympathy and shit. And it's just like, obviously, he's in a lot of pain. You're going to feel that way, but there is a new level where you're just kind of like reckoning with the fact that this person's life and existence is going to be nothing but pain until they die. And it's terrifying because you're just like, how long has this person been alive? Why hasn't anyone put him out of his misery? What is the point of keeping him alive? And these questions stay in the back of your head throughout mouthwashing until you just keep asking yourself them over and over again. You keep getting the feeling that something on this ship is happening that you're not being shown, that the game is not explicitly telling you about. And you begin to develop a sense of distrust and unease with the video game, not with characters in the video game. You're like, what are you doing? Like, why is this happening the way this is happening? And you don't get an answer to that until a very specific point in the game where a very specific thing is revealed to you. And after this game is a fucking nightmare. From the audio design, from the visual design that are both brilliant and work together very well, to the segments of gameplay that are brief in this, as this is mostly a visual kind of passive experience. It still does use the gameplay to really drive home a lot of its themes and mechanics in ways that I found profoundly fucking upsetting.
Yeah, this is one of the most special experiences with a game I've had this year as well. Um, I went into this game completely blind as I try to go into most, if not everything. I didn't even know that this was a horror game when I played it. I just knew that it was a game that was quite short, that a lot of people were talking about. And so I went into it and it was like, yeah, it only takes about 2.5 hours to play, and it's a profoundly horrific experience that is like what it does formally with the actual like visual effects and the game, like the look of the game and the performance of the game and the way that it kind of manipulates what you might initially perceive as a hardware glitch into an actual part of its storytelling on a regular basis is really, really like well done. It's really well written, well voice acted. It's not voice acted actually. Why did I say that? It's not voice acted. That's actually quite an important point.
It
Um,
feels like it's voice acted though. The characters are so vivid that it almost like in my memory, I feel like characters like Swansea and Anya have voices.
yeah, it was like there's something about the experience about how kind of deeply connected in different ways I became to each of these characters that made them feel so real in a way you wouldn't expect from a game that doesn't have any voice acting in it. Um, I was so there's such a richness to the imagery of this game and to the suggestion of what this game chooses to emit and what it chooses to show, and also the way that its deliberate non-linear structure means that it actually you have to kind of actively engage with it, and you will miss certain things not just because of how much happens, but because of the fact that it's so shown in such a jumbled up order. So much so that a couple of key events in the story almost went completely over my head because I was so tunneled in focusing on a particular interpretation of the story or a particular reading of the characters. And so I actually really want to go back and play it again because I feel like this game might even hit 100 times harder the second time you play it because of foreknowledge, knowing what you're going into and what the story is sort of really about. It's a very smartly designed video game. Uh, so yeah, I was gonna put it on my list. I figured you, Jake, from what I could gather, had a pretty profound experience with it. So I thought I'd leave it to you to bring up, but
Yeah.
I'll co-sign completely. This is a really like creative and original game.
I have qualms about the part of the game, or about certain parts of the games that are the game that is like a game. Um, I I again, I mean, I can't really even spoil this, but the part where you're wandering around and there's something after you.
I
Yeah,
as
I
I
know the
was
part. I know the part.
as I was playing that, I was like to myself, I bet this is the part Morgan hates. And
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah.
as I was playing
That's
it, I
exactly.
was like, it's such a fucking like it's such a power move to make you do this like
Yeah.
this slowly, and
Mhm.
like and to make it take this long. I
I, I don't mind that it was that slow or that it played out in the way that it did. I minded that I had absolutely no fucking idea what I was looking for.
mm,
So that I passed it over like five different times. And
yeah.
it's something, it's like, oh, the fact that it's unintuitive makes it scarier. Like, no, I just didn't
Well,
know what I was doing.
it's the kind of like risk that you take in building a sequence like that, right? Is that if people have a bad experience with it, or they don't like stumble through it the way you want them to, then they're going to hate it. And that's the kind of risk you sort of have to take in making something like that, is that it's not gonna work for everyone. Um, and mouthwashing is full of those kinds of calculated creative risks, I think, where it's going to leave a certain subsection of its audience cold, provided that they are going into this reasonably not knowing what to expect. Um, it's not going to be a game for everyone. Uh, I haven't really mentioned it, but there are sequences of surreal horror in this game that are truly I profoundly unnerving in a way that I seldom really experience. Like I was
I
surprised.
I will never, ever, no matter how hard I try to forget, will ever forget the curly sequence in this game.
Mm,
You all know what I'm talking about.
yeah.
And just to toss out some other games on here that I've played, I think the other big experience I've had with this so far is probably Hades. I'm a really big sort of hack and slash dungeon crawler RPG person, like ever since Torchlight. I've just been really, really into those kinds of games. And frankly, I have not played one as mechanically perfect as Hades. This is a game that, again, it's not exactly like it doesn't have the most content or anything, but it makes such maximal usage of its specific parts, the way it doles out its story, the voice acting, the art, the actual game feel made me be like, I'm gonna have trouble going back to Diablo 4. A game with great game feel because this was just like, this is visceral in a way that these games just fucking aren't, honestly. And I have enjoyed everything about that experience. I'm probably even more stringent with my scoring with games than I am anything else, just because with games, there is the biggest volume of shit you can fuck up. And with Hades, I really can't think of much that I would change about that experience. Uh, and I mean, I've also played through, I got back into The Binding of Isaac. I recently bought Cyberpunk and started playing that. Bought the Castlevania collection. I played and did not particularly enjoy Borderlands 3. I played Doom Eternal, liked that a fair bit, except for how much platforming is in that game, because why is platforming in my first person shooter? And I bought a shitload of other things that have just been in my backlog. And also installing an emulator into this thing has been a wonderful thing. Please support the official release, blah, 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 blah. I've been able to play games that I haven't been able to or otherwise wouldn't be able to. It is just nice to have a device where I can play the HD remakes of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess without A, breaking whatever device is currently running those two games, and B, having to buy a fucking Wii U because Nintendo won't port their goddamn games. So that's been nice, and I get to catch up on a lot of games that I've just never been able to. I have like 50 Pokemon ROM hacks. I have like a bunch of Mario games. I just like fucking, I have the entire fucking history of games right here, bitch. And it's nice. It's a wonderful little device. I highly recommend buying it if you have the disposable income to do so. And I'm poor as shit and I managed to afford it somehow. So great stuff. I love video games.
So, my number four is going to be something that happened on, I believe it's going to be April 7th now, we're up to. And that is going to be Cody Rhodes winning WWE Championship from Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 41.
I know about this. Okay, all right.
Now, it takes a moment to explain the magnitude of this moment and why it's actually one of my favorite moments from this year. First, I'm going to start with the character of the Rhodes family. So the
Yeah.
Rhodes family have been a name in professional wrestling since as far back as the 1960s, with Dusty Rhodes being the just most famous wrestlers in American history.
I'm a
Just
big
this kind
fan.
of
I'm a big fan of the older one, Long and Winding.
thank you.
Is there any relation to Randy?
Not that I'm aware of, although there
I
was a wrestler named Randy Rhodes who was not related to either Dusty Rhodes or the Ozzy Osbourne guitarist. That's just another
Dis
bit of interesting trivia for
Disappointing.
you.
Damn.
Very immensely. Anyway, Dusty Rhodes was originally positioned at, massive regional star in the South, even all the way up to New York, back in the days of the wrestling territory system, where rather than being controlled by one central organization, wrestling was basically a series of smaller promotions allied into a singular cartel called the National Wrestling Alliance. And Dusty Rhodes was one of
The
the top
NWA.
stars. The NWA, yeah,
The NRA.
My
who
goodness.
Wait,
Dusty Rhodes was one of the top stars who would travel around in between the various promotions. And at one point, the then WWWF splinters away from the National Wrestling Alliance under the stewardship of Vincent Kennedy McMahon, not to be confused with his father, Vince McMahon Sr. More detail on this in the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary series.
My
But
coworker was
Vincent,
telling me that that documentary was really good. Like he just started talking about it without being prompted.
because it highlights
it's
the fact that Vince
yeah.
McMahon is one of the most insane people alive.
That was the impression
It
I
was
got.
me, Austin. It was
It
me
was
all
me all
along.
along.
That was the impression I got as well. To me, he's
Yeah.
just the guy from the reaction GIF. But
Mhm.
I get that he's more than that. Like yeah.
So yeah.
That's where he
Anyway,
should
there
have
was a
stayed.
period in time before Hulk Hogan became the biggest thing ever in 1984, defeating the Iron Sheik in his first title reign,
And
where
jabronis.
Dusty Jabronis, where Dusty Rhodes was positioned as a potential star for WWE as their kind of headlining champion. Dusty had sold out Madison Square Garden as a headlining act multiple times to this point, only for the Midwestern. I guess he was Floridian originally, but Hogan really came into his stride under the Midwestern AWA promotion. Anyway, Hulk Hogan was chosen over Dusty, becomes this massive celebrity throughout all of the 80s to a level that's kind of hard to really communicate just how big Hulkamania was, where Hulk Hogan was fucking everywhere. All sorts of stupid merchandise. My
Movies.
mom, when she movies, yeah, movies, TV
It's like
shows
this.
later in the
Uh,
decade.
it's like this. Hulk Hogan was the Beatles for people who have fucked their cousin.
Maybe a little
Yeah.
undignified, but I'll take that as a description. Sure.
Is there anything dignified about Hulk Hogan?
No.
No, fair enough. I'll give you that. But throughout the remainder of the century and even up into the current 21st century, the Rhodes have persisted as a massive force throughout wrestling, although never claiming that the now later WWE championship, despite the fact that we have Dusty, who wrestled there for many years, his son Dustin going on to be a major star in the form of this bizarre, vaguely homosexual coded character named Gold Dust.
Gold
And
Dust.
and Cody Rhodes, later the second generation son of Dusty, entering the WWE as Stardust. And up to this point, he kind of realizes his WWE career is not really going anywhere. Just because the Stardust character is not getting any kind of major promotional push in the same way that his older brother and father did. So around 2015, just says, I'm gone. He leaves the WWE for the comfort of the independent scene, where he then, tours around, basically just goes to every major independent promotion in the United States, Canada, Japan, Mexico that he can to get his name out there and grow his notoriety, joining factions like the Bullet Club, being one of the founding members of All Elite Wrestling. And so Cody Rhodes on the independent scene makes a name for himself and makes the fans come to love and respect the Rhodes name again.
If you're
Then,
unfamiliar with Cody Rhodes, just just picture a guy that would be like the big Nazi brute that Indiana Jones really struggles to beat the shit out of in a tight, really tense action sequence in an Indiana Jones film that does not exist.
And that's not a bad description because Cody Rhodes just has that physical presence. He looks like like when you think of what a professional wrestler is meant to look like, you would kind of, and you pull something out of a hat, it kind of looks something like Cody Rhodes.
Yeah.
But after a 7 year absence or so, he returns to the WWE, leaving the independents behind to make another run for the for the for one of the longest standing and certainly the most prestigious championship in professional wrestling, the WWE Championship. However, every great hero needs a villain, and that villain is, of course, the tribal chief, Roman Reigns. Uh, I'll spare you the full Roman Reigns story. If you really want to go into that, as Jake mentioned, watch that Super Eye Patch Wolf video. That'll give you some better
Well,
context.
one
But
of the
the
best videos I have ever watched is his Roman Reigns video. Like if you don't give a fuck about wrestling, I do not care. Go watch that video. It's so good.
the long and short of it is, though, Roman Reigns is the villainous champion who has reigned over WWE for multiple years now as it's holding its top prize for the longest amount of time since Hulk Hogan did all the way back in 1984. So that's another millstone weighing down on Cody's neck coming into this WrestleMania. He is now facing a man a who has held the gold for just as long as the man who took the spotlight from his father. And at WrestleMania 40, with the odds against him in a bloodline rules match, it is in this main event at night 2 of WrestleMania that Cody Rhodes, after now 60 years of his family vying for this top prize, defeats Roman Reigns and becomes the now still reigning WWE champion. 251 days on from the time of this video's recording, Cody Rhodes has been at the top of this company. And what makes this reign feel so monumental is just Cody's attempt and I feel success to connect with his fans. Because even when I went to a WWE SmackDown show earlier this year, Rhodes was there. And this was a show, for context, that happened in early February. The interstate, and we had like just one of the worst storms we had had the entire year that same night. Like the interstate had about 2 inches of snow built up on it.
Oof.
And despite this, we drove all the way from Omaha down to Lincoln to watch SmackDown. And after the main event card had ended, Cody Rhodes came out to the audience, thanked everyone for being there, and proceeded to have like this 10-minute long untelevised match with Japanese legend Shinsuke Nakamura for the crowd. And that was just fucking awesome. That was the moment where it made me feel just completely invested in him as a character, where it's like, yeah, this guy, he cares about the fans. He wants to have a connection with them. And even one of my sister's friends who was a little closer to front row got a picture with him and shit. But I guess that's just the magnitude of it, and why this championship victory, even though, yeah, everyone knows wrestling is predetermined and fixed. That's why these stories can still connect
Totally
with
unlike
people
boxing, for
because,
instance.
yes, unlike boxing. Anyway, but that is why wrestling is so special, because even if you do not believe that wrestling is real, you can believe that the personalities are real.
The form of organic storytelling that wrestling presents is a medium unlike any other, and it allows for a lot of silly bullshit. But when things coalesce, it's like this, like with the Rhodes and with fucking with Roman Reigns, it's like you have like these two dynastic clans of wrestlers who are about to like show. I mean, like this is an anime, dude. Like these guys who have been like, mid card their whole career because of the upset, of just like their guy being relegated to the silver medal while a bunch of guys go on to get the gold, and it's just like the continuing story, and then finally you get the redemption arc. It's just like this is storytelling, man. This is what it's all about, dude.
And it needs to be said that like even like despite the match like despite what you can say about matches being fixed, it's like the desire to still be the face of a company, to be a champion, is still a legitimate real aspiration that extends beyond a script or a television format. It's something that is a
I mean,
legitimate palpable
movies are
emotion that.
fixed. Shows are fixed. People still watch those.
Oh yeah, and in those, no, you think there's still not legitimate competition between actors for roles or major recognition or parts? Like, just saying. But that is my number four.
My number four is Pearl Jam's Wreckage. This is my song of the year. I don't know where to begin describing the song. I mean, the narrative thrust of it is someone finally breaking free of a toxic situation that wrecked their life. But it's about to me anyways, it's about the joy of finally being free of that situation, even if you are left to comb through the wreckage, as Eddie Vedder and co say over and over again as the song closes out. It's structurally flawless. Has some of Mike McCready's best guitar work ever, I think. Um, and how textured it is, and where it's not necessarily flashy, but serves the song entirely and lifts it up and makes every aspect of it that much better. It so perfectly encapsulates the feeling of just finally being done with something that has for better and for worse at times dominated your life, and now you are available to pick up the pieces but also to build something out of them all over again. It's by far the best song on that album, um, and it is my favorite song of the year.
Yeah, it's an amazing song. It's my favorite on the album too. Um, yeah. What are you gonna What are you gonna say? It's a classic Pearl Jam song, and with artists like that, when you're this deep into their career, it's nice when you can get one of those in an album, if that. As for me, my number four on this list is so I of all of the mediums that I wanted to try and balance my very limited spare time between this year, the one that's probably gotten the shortest shrift has been movies. I've gotten a chance to see a few movies, like I've gotten a chance to keep up to date on some of the biggest releases of the year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing like Anora is coming out around Christmas time here. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Then you got The Brutalist is coming out in January here. I'm very much looking forward to that. Uh,
Nosferatu.
yeah, Nosferatu as well. I still have to see The Northman. I'm so bad. Um, but my favorite film of the year that I have seen, and it's kind of no competition, frankly, is Luca Guadagnino's Challenges. And so my fourth spot goes, I guess, to a dual place for that film and for its incredible score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Um, that the score in particular is like something that is like so much a part of the visceral impact of the film as anything else. It's an absolutely kinetic movie. It completely bowled me over. Great central performances, great cinematography, great score, as I've already mentioned. I think to me, Luca Guadagnino is interesting. He's like, I think, one of the most interesting, like major filmmakers working today. Every movie he puts out is somehow both distinct in its identity and also recognizably him in a very sort of intrinsic way.
He's a pure journeyman and a pure auteur all in one
Yeah, he's like,
giant package.
he's like, it's not the greatest comparison, but he's like Soderbergh in that respect, where he could do anything
Yeah.
next, and it could be completely unrelated to the last thing he did, but it would have his feel like recognizably. Um, and I don't always click with everything that Guadagnino does, but I like when I don't in a weird way because it just shows to me that he has this kind of distinctive sense of what he wants to do that isn't always going to land for everyone and isn't always going to be like serving a particular audience that he's accrued. He's just going to do wherever his fascinations go. He's going to follow up Call Me by Your Name by doing a really esoteric and personal and bloated, but like very creatively fascinating remake of Suspiria, for instance. Like he's just going to do what he does. And I think that's awesome. But to me, Challenges is his best film so far, or at least my favorite of the movies he's made so far. Um, I just can't get enough of the fucking high that I was on walking out of the theater from that final sequence and then just immediately wanting to queue up the score and go and listen to it again is just one of the most memorable experiences I've had this year. Movie's great. As it seems like is the case with a lot of great things this year, if they reach a certain level of popularity, they get sort of not discoursed to death necessarily in this case, although that does happen, but they just kind of get oversaturated. So, for a while there, I was like, I need to distance myself from the cultural life cycle of this thing, and I did, and now I've gone back to it, and I'm like, yeah, this still fucking rules. I love this so much. So yeah, one of the best cultural like moments of the year, pieces of media that came out this year is absolutely hands down that movie for me, um, and the music that goes with it. I cloud nine whenever I think about that movie. It's just fantastic.
Just barely missing my honorable mentions.
Technically, it's one of mine.
True, yes.
So,
Like with many things, we have a reasonable amount of unity on a lot of this stuff among us.
and to break away from that very starkly, is my number four, which I guarantee you I'm the only person that has this one, and I'm also the only person here who's actually going to partake in this, because it is a very niche, very specific thing that you kind of have to have a predetermined interest in, uh, somewhat, I guess. My number four is a 13-hour long video essay made on the lore of the Lego sub-franchise Bionicles. And I know that's a lot to take in, but rest
I just
assured,
got more autistic
yes,
in you
exactly. This
listing
is I
this.
I believe the top comment, or at least one of the top comments on the very video is this is one of the autism infinity stones I've been looking for. Thank you. That's the best way to relay the appeal of what this is. I am somebody who grew up and my first like thing as a child with like interaction with like franchises or properties or like things I could consume or whatever was Bionicle. Like they were in the little canisters. They were always there at Target and Walmart. And whenever I would go with my mom, I would be real fucking quiet in the store and be like, "Hey mom, can I get one of the Bionicles?" And then that's how that worked. And that worked for years because Bionicle was a franchise from like 2001 to 2010. And this video by YouTuber Ben Saint, who kind of specializes in explaining these incredibly niche topics and subjects in the form of lectures that he will present, has a 13-hour long video essay that explains the lore of this franchise. And the way I can best relay the appeal of this is that Bionicle is maybe the single most creative fictional property I think I've ever like witnessed. It is so alien from ever like if you are somebody who's just like, man, where is all the creativity? Where are all the cool stories? All everything now is so like streamlined and sanded off. It's like you're wrong, but I understand why you might feel that way. Go and partake in this and witness what happens when somebody is told by a multi-billion-dollar company, hey, we have this line of toys. We're going to have a new line of them every year in the form of like seasons. You need to write the story to this franchise, and you can do whatever you want. Like, whatever you want. You just need to name everything, a list of these predetermined names, because funnily enough, Bionicle actually got in a little bit of hot water with indigenous Maori people because of their usage of the indigenous Maori language for a lot of the early Bionicle stuff. And they got in hot water
Oh,
legally and had
fuck.
to, yeah,
This is unearthing of the most buried, distant of memories of this controversy.
yes.
I didn't even
I really wanted this to happen.
I don't even remember much of this being a thing because I was never a Bionicle kid. I thought it was cool. I didn't, yeah, what,
I
but
didn't know either.
yeah, no, okay, shit.
They had to basically come up with a list of names that didn't belong to any like culture or whatever, and that led to the creator having to reuse certain names because there's so many characters and locations within this universe that he just had to. But basically, they write this guy a blank check. They tell this guy, you know, you're a writer, whatever, write the story as long as these characters are in it every successive season or arc, do whatever you want. And this kind of thing is an anomaly. We will never see anything like this ever again. This is a story that is 10 years long in the making, that is so insanely ambitious that you don't even realize how fucking ambitious it is until you get halfway through the story, and then you get to a point where you're like, wait a minute, what the fuck is this? And there's a twist that happens in this story. An amazing, groundbreaking, fucking like paradigm shifting twist that happens in this story that is one of the most genius things I've just been like, I will never think of anything that clever as a writer. I will never think of anything that cool. I will be chasing that for the rest of my life because it is so ingenious that I just have to sit back and be like, you know what, man? I don't know how you did this, but you fucking did it. This story is like, there are so many tangents, so many different things that, like, this is not a tight or complete story by any means. Bionicle actually did have to end about 2 years sooner than it was supposed to. So there's a lot of like truncated stuff at the end. But I really just gotta say that I've never witnessed anything like this because it's so far apart from any sort of established storytelling trope. It is so alien that it's like, wow, this really was something that that someone put a lot of love into. It's obviously very corporate. It's very limited, you know, because again, it was made to sell toys. But that's also kind of what makes it special. I remember I unearthed so much nostalgia watching this video and remembering that the first form of storytelling I ever partook in as a person was when you could go on the Bionicle website in the mid 2000s and upload pictures of your own constructible figures, and you could come up with a backstory and a little thing, and you could share it with everyone. I remember going on those websites and building my own things, and I had a digital camera that you had to insert floppy disks into to be able to take pictures, and then I would put in my floppy disk in my ancient HP laptop, and I would drag and drop them onto my desktop, and I would upload them there. And so there was so much about this where I was like, wow, I knew so much of this, but also there's so much shit that like some of the appeal of this is literally in the fact that Ben Saint, the guy who had to do this video, basically like scoured the earth for every piece of Bionicle media in existence and eventually discovered that there is an archive of this being maintained and updated to this day with everything, digital scans, fucking instruction booklets, comics, everything that has to do with the story, and Christian Faber, the guy who wrote it, the contributions to that. There are web posts that have been archived from the story's authors who like posted things about the story's lore on forums and shit that have all been amalgamated into this video that is the summary of everything from the story you can glean from McDonald's toy lines to chapter books you could have bought at the book fair to all this kind of shit, and it jams it into this 13-hour video in a way that chronologically tells Bionicle's story. And it's just like this is a video that took this man a year to make. Like he visibly every couple of hours you see him lose hair. Like he gains hair on his beard, loses it on his head, is bald and has a like he looks like a monk by the end of this. And at the end again, like I broke this into a series of like I would listen to like an arc a night at work every like couple of days. And it was one of the most enriching experiences I've had this year. It was lovely. It like re-energized me creatively. I'm just like, there's so many ideas and stuff here that like I just don't see enough of. They're just so, out there and the way it all comes together, it's not perfect, but it's like nothing will ever be this interestingly flawed ever again. Nothing that becomes this popular will ever like be like this again. It is this moment of time perfectly crystallized and amalgamated into this 13-hour long video where you will sit like you would have to do dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of research to go through everything that he goes through in this video. So in a way, it's actually a really effective abridging of something that would take you even longer to consume. So I'm not saying that anybody and everybody should go and watch this 13-hour long video, but if the idea of a story that is just this fucking like whoa and strange and has all of these moving parts that just no story that would come out today would be made with this many interesting flaws, then turn this on. It will be fascinating to you.
Well, I want to go for an experience not too dissimilar from something Jake mentioned earlier for my number three, and also I'm now, I guess, just gonna stick with the theme of progressing through the year and talking about seeing the Mars Volta live in concert.
Yeah.
Which I have no idea. I might have mentioned this on this show before already, but regardless of that, the Mars Volta, as has been chronicled throughout this whole channel, have been just one of my favorite bands ever. From their first album, that is just this, sledgehammer of progressive rock to the more avant-garde experimental work they would go on to create, and even to reuniting and releasing a new album. The Mars Volta have just gone through this. I feel I've gone through an incredible journey with the band in the kind of, I guess, 5, 6 years I've been a fan of them now. And that kind of felt like it came to a head, came to zenith with getting to see them live at the Admiral here in Omaha, which admittedly is maybe not my favorite venue. It's not that it sounds bad. It's more so that the venue is just this like elevated stage and just like this, like I don't know, 200 square foot ballroom. It's just completely flat, no elevation. So you're just craning your head up the band the whole time who are on this stage 10 some feet above the audience, which never my favorite experience. But what was so
The
meaningful
stage
about
should
this,
be like right here on a human being.
yes, absolutely. That is more than correct. So the owner first was a group called Terry Genderbender, who was this one woman who does this kind of, I guess, like kind of rockish, kind of punk sounding music. It was not my favorite thing in the world, but in terms of just the music itself, but the kind of performance here, where she's dancing around with this like mustache that's like it was drawn on with one of his makeup pens, and a large flamenco dress, and eventually dancing through the crowd. Just spectacle that was ridiculously entertaining and fun. The band on stage were still good. Again, not like exactly my thing, but when Mars Volta themselves come on, just tear the fucking house down. It was, I believe, of the set, about like 7 of the 10 songs, and they went on for like 90 minutes. It was like a proper long epic show that really gave you the experience of what listening to the Mars Volta was like. It's like, first off, just seeing Omar play live, it's like, how does a man do that with his fingers in that succession for that
Does
long?
he have extra tendons? Does he have
And
multiple ligaments?
how does one endure this level of performance? Like, insane to watch just him. Cedric vocally, he's lost a bit of the gas that he had, but that's also a product of it having been 23 years. So I was not all that disappointed by that, to be quite honest. Like, can you do? I do
Like,
not expect.
listen to that high-pitched voice. You think he can maintain that for that much longer? Probably not. So it's probably a good thing that you got to see him before his voice was completely shot.
No, yeah. It's like, exactly like, if Freddie Mercury was still alive, do you think Queen would down to this? Hell no. I mean, he's kind of a god amongst men, so maybe there's the chance, but like even Michael Jackson, his voice just shifted so radically throughout his career, and there's a fantastic video on that, but that's not the point of this segment. But yeah, just seeing the band, and then it was really just like they kind of just played the hits, which was the other part of it that was just exceptional because I think they might have played the entirety of The Last in the Cotorium
Oh,
throughout that
yeah.
show. Granted, kind of broken up and segmented and sequenced different than on the actual album, because I very distinctly remember uh, the closing part of the show being Sonne Lumiere into Drunk Ship of Lanterns, was those kind of first two songs on the album being the ending to show, had this really kind of classic sense of finality to it, where it felt like being on the journey with the band. And even hearing songs from the new album, those sounded way better live than they do actually on the album. Like, just
That
there
doesn't
were,
surprise me at all.
yeah,
Yeah.
no. There's just a certain level of spunk to it that is not captured on those recordings. There's a certain level of chemistry that the group has really makes them kind of fly by, and to the point where, like, if I were not that discerning and wasn't hyper fixated on this band, I probably wouldn't have noticed that was the case. They would have just blended in with the rest of the set. Uh, but the fact those were at such a higher level of quality and energy, and on the self-titled album from 2022, was really nice. Although perhaps the greatest part about this show was friend of the podcast Connor was there with me,
Yeah.
and I had ended up meeting up with him and at least one of his bandmates from Coke Citic. I apologize to the other member if you were there and I forgot about you. That's my fault. I'm sorry. But that was also a really great experience to see someone I've spoken with so much over the internet in person for once. I mean, we'd run into each other before, but it's always a special occasion to see someone you maybe wouldn't see all the time, even though you have that kind of closer level of contact. Uh, but overall, that's sort of what I have to say about this show. It was great to feel like I had some sort of, I guess, cap to a chapter of my life to this band who I loved for so long. And, I would be fine if they don't release another album and don't tour again, because I got to see them. I got that moment, and I think the me from high school when I was like 16, 17, had you told me that was in the future, I don't know if I would have believed that. And it was just cool.
My number three is Sean Baker's Anora. For reference, the only Sean Baker film I have seen besides Anora is Red Rocket, which I thought was pretty good, kind of abrasive in a way that I didn't love. But I got what it was doing. I appreciated that, and that I'm definitely glad I saw it. Some really great central performances in that film in particular. Anora is one of the best films of the decade, like top three material. If you're unfamiliar, it's about a New York sex worker who goes on a whirlwind romance with and ends up marrying the son of a Russian oligarch. And as you might imagine, hijinks ensues. Um, so this is a three act structure type movie, and it's like each act in itself is a different movie. The first one, I don't know, it's this is a relatively cheap comparison, but the first act is sort of Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls. The second act is Martin Scorsese's After Hours, and the third act is a Sean Baker film as you would expect it, pretty much. A film that hollowed me out and filled me up and knocked me on my ass emotionally and made me howl with laughter unlike anything else that's been released this year. The lead actress, Marky Madison, if she does not have an Oscar in the next 5 months, then someone is going to have to pay. It's simply one of the best lead performances I've seen in a film this century.
That's your whole life.
Damn.
And in films released this century, you
I've,
cracker,
yeah.
um, it's a really special film. I have not stopped thinking about it. I saw it on the night of the first snow of this year, or maybe not of this year, but at least of this winter season, and that was for reasons that you will see once you see the film, utterly perfect. I can't say enough good things about it.
I am a huge fan of Sean Baker's last three movies. We buried among the mountain of content on this channel is actually an analysis of the movie Red Rocket that I did with friend of the podcast, Zach. A movie that, like, it feels like no one saw that movie, but I really love that movie. Um, a Sean Baker movie about a sex worker. I mean, it's
Would
like
have thought.
Okay.
What is undersold about Sean Baker, I find, is that he is the greatest maker of comedies working today, probably.
he's like able to find like true gut busting hilarity through like just pure depictions of joy in his movies. And which is a really like sweet thing. There's not really, I mean, sometimes there is, but there's generally not like a darkness to the humor in those movies. It's kind of like a joyful sort of, even if there's a darkness to the situations the characters can be in, usually like the pathos of his movies comes from a sense of like triumph, which is really nice. My number three is back to the music world. I My album of the year this year is MJ Lenderman's Manning Fireworks, which feels a little bit like, I don't really care that it's a boring pick, that a lot of publications have picked it, that everyone's kind of circling around it, that a lot of people, to the extent that a lot of people are sick of hearing of MJ Lenderman. So I'm not, and because we also reviewed it reasonably recently, I'm not going to talk about it in this countdown. I'm going to talk instead about my second favorite album of the year, which we have also reviewed in a video on this channel, but a little bit of time has passed, and so I want to shout it out because again, like with the Los Campesinos thing, this is not just like me putting the album on here, but it's also just kind of the story of the album and how it came to have the level of success that it had seemingly out of nowhere. And that's Cindy Lee's album Diamond Jubilee. Cindy Lee is the solo project of one of the former members of the short-lived but beloved post-punk band Women. And Cindy Lee has been their solo project for a number of years, released a number of albums, but it wasn't until this year's mammoth double album Diamond Jubilee, which released in I can't remember whether it was late March or early April, but it was around that time that they suddenly blew up. Essentially, music publications began to cover this en masse, and it was recently named Pitchfork's #1 album of the year. Uh, this album sideswiped me completely. I put off listening to it initially for a little while because of how long it was and because of a sense that I wasn't sure if it would really fully be my thing. And then I became obsessed with it. I would listen to it over and over and do nothing but it. And the funny thing about it was that in that early stage of its existence, it was only available. I think you could download it. I think that she uploaded the file somewhere random. I can't remember where, but you could also listen to it on YouTube, and it wasn't on any streaming services. So I had the YouTube video of the album downloaded, and I would be listening to it just from the YouTube app all the time. And then eventually I got the files. And I think I told this story when we reviewed it, but yeah, it existed in a really strange way for me initially, or in a really unique way at least, relative compared to other albums, where because of its existence as this one file, not broken up into songs, I was experiencing it like that, in a way that, like without distinguishing songs in the way you would typically listening to it on streaming. So yeah, and the whole thing, listening to it that way as a kind of holistic single monolith rather than a collection of songs really helped me to appreciate what a well arranged work it is. Consistently stunning songs, some of the most beautiful songs of the whole year, and of the last few years. This will definitely be an album that I shout out when we talk about the best albums of the decade so far. But I couldn't not mention it here because the surprise success of it, uh, and the marvelous uniqueness of it as well. It doesn't really sound like anything else that's popular or trending and even in indie music at all. It just came in with this like, echoing Phil Spector and the Brill building music of the 60s and just like completely magically working in this way I could have never predicted. And I think a lot of it is just to do with how great these songs are. They're just magnificently well-crafted, beautiful songs. Um, and, with a lot of genre diversity, even just above and beyond that basic sonic template, the album goes in a lot of different directions, which helps it to sustain its length really, really beautifully. Um, so yeah, I think it's just a masterpiece and will be one of the enduring cultural relics of this year specifically, as just something that was a real feel-good story amongst a pretty, miserable year, all things considered, in terms of just, lots of great releases this year, but the vibes have been pretty rank in 2024. So it was nice. This was a kind of shining beacon for me.
That brings me to my #3, which this is yet again media that has been released since we started this podcast that we just haven't talked about. This is two films from the same person, and it feels dumb to come onto the internet and wildly extol the virtues of two films from the most acclaimed and important director of the medium's history is a bit stupid, but here I am doing that because my three is a tie between the last two films from one Mr. Steven Spielberg, The Fabelmans and West Side Story. And with West Side Story specifically, I am somebody who I kind of get annoyed when I hear people say I don't like musicals because whenever someone says that, it's just like, oh, you've never watched a good one. Like you're just admitting. It's like when someone says, oh, I don't like, music. It's like, shut up. Yeah, you do. You just haven't found any that you like listening to on a regular basis. But when watching West Side Story, the appeal of that was never because it was a musical. It was purely because it was a new film from Steven Spielberg. But I have a lot of memories associated with the original version of that movie, even though I don't really feel like I've watched it in its entirety in a way that lets me like connect with it or even say that I could like rate it or evaluate it now. But I used to watch a group of like 5 or 6 movies all the time as a child with my grandmother. She loved the channel Turner Classic Movies. She would watch that shit endlessly. And whenever I wasn't playing board games with her, we were probably watching a movie. I've probably seen Gone with the Wind 6 times and still remember nothing about it. Not that I'm missing much from what I hear. Uh, One of those movies was West Side Story. And I remember that she was just she could never stop talking about how beautiful the movie was. She loved the colors. She loved just like how vibrant it was. And I think that might be the first time I witnessed somebody have an appreciation for just like the textural flourishes in a work of art that like, were something beyond like the story and the characters or whatever. So I actually had kind of I had a loaded gun when going to see West Side Story, which is a sentence that I did not expect to say, even if I meant it metaphorically. Uh,
You
uh,
shouldn't have that when you when you go.
no, I mean you never should. You never should when you see any film, really. That said, I watched it with my girlfriend early on this year, and I was just so taken with it. I was just so in love with the idea of film once it was over. The fact that we still have somebody like Spielberg still making movies. I mean, it's like Marty, like and how they've kind of both had this sort of late career series of heaters after a while, where it's abundantly clear that it's like they're recognizing that maybe they don't have too much time left, and they are cranking out seminal works like it is their fucking job to do so. And West Side Story to me is one of those, just because Spielberg's resurgence hasn't been quite as strong as somebody like Marty's, if you ask me. Like, there are some movies, like I know that a lot of people I know ride for a movie like The Post or whatever, but it's just not really something that I am all that
A
interested
lot
in.
of people, it's just Zach.
Okay, well, a lot of people I know,
I
a lot of people
am
I know really.
logging on as post defender.
Yes, Ed, like it does not excite me in the way that, film as a raw medium is capable of doing it. I haven't really been super enthused about a movie Spielberg has made since like Jesus, I don't know, Munich. It's been a while since I've been head over heels for something that he made.
7-year-old Jake just absolutely fist pumping at
You
Munich
know,
trailers.
it's funny you say that. I watched that when I was 9.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, it really is. But like, needless to say, I wasn't feverishly anticipating this like I was a Killers of the Flower Moon, for instance. But when I did finally get around to it, it's like I am. I don't think I love a director of photography combo more than I love Spielberg and his new DP guy. Who the fuck? What is his name? I
Janusz
always forget.
Kaminski.
Kaminsky. Kaminsky is like again, even in movies that I'm not head over heels for, it's like Kaminsky is cooking and shit like Bridge of Spies. But in West Side Story, to paraphrase Riley, he is feeding the homeless in this film. He like there is camera tricks that are pulled off in West Side Story that are legitimately so amazing. I paused the movie to open-mouthedly gape at them with my girlfriend as we sat here and watched it. I was so taken with just the raw technicalities of this film and the way it is shot, the way it is edited, the way it punctuates with the music, the way it all comes together. It is just the synergy is what the art of filmmaking is. If you want to like isolate components and talk about them, I'm sure you can. But to me, West Side Story is the biggest like proponent of the alchemy of filmmaking that I've seen this year. But the really interesting wrinkle in this is the movie I saw after that, which is The Fablemans. And I put off this movie
What are we,
purely
some kind of
by
fable man?
I put this off purely because I knew I'd like it. Like it was such a like I read about it and was just like, yeah, this is probably a slam dunk for me, and I just
That
kind of didn't
sentence you
watch
just
it.
said, I put this off because I knew I'd like it. Like, so I feel like that sums us up, like the four of us as people, so perfectly.
Really fucking does. Wow, that's so
Mutual,
salient.
yes.
That's very true.
I
But I
needed
mean, like,
I needed
and
to be in a
nothing
good
proves that more.
headspace to like I needed to be in like a good headspace to like this, you
It's like
know?
when
Oh,
it's like when I wake up in the morning and see a YouTuber, I like just drop like a 2 hour banger, and I'm like, okay, so I need to wait for dinner to watch this.
oh God, that's me. It's like, oh, I gotta wait until after I do this one thing on my shift, and then right after that, I'll turn this YouTube. Fuck.
I'm gonna
I'm
cook.
absolutely like I saw the early version of the new FD Signifier video on Diddy popped up in my emails, and I'm like, I'm watching that later once I finish drinks in my workplace. That's where we are mentally, in case you wanted to know. But it was the Fablemans that I watched that truly like really like blew me away in a way I didn't even anticipate after being blown away. Because all I heard about when it came to this movie, almost to the point where it became mimetic, is that it's like, oh, it's about, it's a real love letter to movies. And to that I say, what the fuck are you talking about? The Fablemans is a movie about how filmmaking and storytelling is one of the most perverse things that you can do and participate in as a human being, and how it's this complicated, thorny, emotional, like thing that is like in no way simple. That the ways in which, ideas of inspiration can coalesce with one another, and the ways in which, taking parts of your real life and putting them in your art is so much less complicated than it's sharing a part of yourself with everyone so that everyone can think you're beautiful, or whatever the fuck people think this movie is about. And instead is examining this as something that someone does when they have nothing else to turn to, when everything in their life has fallen around them and broken and they don't know what to do. They have to do something with it, and that something is often filmmaking. Sometimes that thing can be podcasting, but it's not a love letter to anything. It is an unraveling of the complicated reasons as to why human beings make art and tell stories. And in that respect, I think that this might be the Spielberg movie that somehow, over the course of several decades, and this man's movies being in my life more than any other director, definitively, provably, I think this might be the movie of his that I connect with the most. That's obscene to me. That's crazy. Like he managed to beat out E.T. in Jurassic Park. How the fuck do you do that when you're 70? It was just kind of inspiring to see that anybody could make something like that far into their career. And that I watched it and was like, wow, I really I feel good about my decision to tell stories, about wanting to do that, because it allowed me a greater insight, and also is just like West Side Story, an immaculately shot movie. The Fablemans, oh my fucking god, dude. Every shot in this movie is it is saying it's a work of art. No shit. Every shot in every movie is a work of art. But this, like, I think about that shot of Paul Dano at the end of this movie with that long shadow cast on the ceiling as he looks at that picture of Michelle Williams. I think about that, and a year off my life disappears. It is agonizing. It is a testament to the power of the image, and all of that meaning of how that's not necessarily a good thing, that the image maybe shouldn't have that much power, but we've given it to it, and now we got to deal with the consequences. But it is still overall a beautiful thing. If your horizon's in the middle,
In the middle, it's
boring.
boring as shit.
Ending your movie with David Lynch, what a power move. What an unbelievable power move.
It's not it's not just David Lynch. It's David Lynch playing John Ford.
The big dick energy is off the charts. It
What won Best Picture that year? I don't care. It was stupid.
was the Fablemans, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, correcting the record.
Absolutely correct. Mine were two for this year. Similar to Riley, I thought about including MJ Letterman's album Manning Fireworks in this spot, also being my favorite of the year, but I figured I would rather give a shout out to a group I was exposed to earlier who basically fucking no one I've heard of and I think are really something special. That being the Georgian psychedelic improvisational rock group GRB3. I was first exposed to this group earlier this year by a friend of the podcast, Ryley, who you can watch on our Frank Zappa apostrophe episode from way back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And we've stayed in contact, and one day he passed this band along to me as just kind of a casual recommendation earlier this year, uh, making special note to their album, The Mission Stage 3, uh, which has this, bizarre kind of creepy cover.
Oh,
Their
Jesus.
whole their whole
Woohoo!
catalog has this very strange kind of distinct aesthetic, just in terms of like the visuals they present themselves with. And it's all this sort of, and I guess I should clarify that the actual placement here is the discography of GRB3 from 2023 up to this present moment of 2024. So that encompasses 7 albums, all of which I've listened to at least once. They're most recent to I've only heard once, so I don't really feel confident enough to have a super strong opinion on those. But this group presents this kind of really improvisational form of like this kind of dark psychedelic jazz that is just very hypnotic, entrancing, and I find myself consistently coming back to. Their record from March of this year, This Life Like a Comet, is an exceptional piece of work. Then there's those earlier albums where you've got Nothing, Nothing, Spring Everlasting, Love Overwhelming, and of course the aforementioned Mission Stage 3 that are composed of these longer, kind of drawn out improvisational pieces that just crawl and creep in these really just skin crawling, fun, disturbing ways. If you wanted a place to start, I would recommend their song, and then in Walk to Narrate, this 13-minute track that at about the 7-minute mark just has this like distinct. There's this part where the drum pattern just switches, and I'm like, oh fuck yeah, it feels like something that could uh, be like the backing soundtrack to like a drawn out like stealth or infiltration sequence movie. Their music feels so large, so cinematic, so captivating. I feel the mystery, the intrigue around this band is so much of what gives them such a special aura. I cannot recommend listening to at least one or two of this band's projects enough.
Yeah, this sounds really interesting to me. I'm
All their
very
stuff is on Bandcamp, by the way. I just found that
That
out, and I
is
just bought the
correct.
Mission Stage 3 on there for only $5. So check them out on Bandcamp. I tried to find their albums on SoulSeek, and they're not even on there to give
I
listeners an idea as to how popular this group is. So
Yeah, always fun to discover a group that kind of exists outside of like Western music culture, essentially, and
Mhm.
get a kind of insight into a world that you're not typically sort of exposed to through normal circles. So that's cool. Morgan, what's your number two?
My number two is something I actually did talk about earlier this year on the show. I saw Jason Isbell at the Red Rocks Amphitheatre and just outside of Denver, Colorado. My entry here is not really that concert, but just the Red Rocks Amphitheatre. Being there is like, you ever see that video of Pink Floyd playing at Pompeii?
Pompeii, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
little like that. Um, it's just like something happened here, divine or otherwise, who is to say, that it's like this is the place where the thing should be. Like all art should be experienced through this vessel, and it's fundamentally unfair that this is so limited in scope of how many people can see it. Um, Genuinely sort of a religious experience hearing music through that venue and in that place.
And since it's Jason live, you know that guitar playing was absolutely fucking unreal.
I There's that, yes. But during their cover of Just Like Heaven and the synths hit, I've never been to a
Oh,
concert where the synths sounded like that, and finally experiencing that was like I when is the Cure going on tour? When is it happening? Get off your ass, Robert.
hey, they just dropped a live version of Songs from the Lost World, so
Yeah, they I would imagine they must be planning on doing some serious international touring,
they've
considering.
they've got more material they're coming out with here relatively soon, so they got to take it somewhere.
Mm.
The Cure does seem like one of those bands who is just like, we'll play in New York and Florida and Los
My ass is not
Angeles
going. I'm not going to Florida.
and and everybody else can go and fuck themselves.
Oh, they're playing in Florida. Have they considered going to America?
It's like, yeah, we're playing in the South. We're playing Chicago. And I'm like,
That's
What? You can get away with that when you say the South and say, Kentucky, because it's like, yeah, Chicago.
yeah.
Look,
We're
I
playing in
would
the South. We're playing in San Diego.
look, I would even grant you Texas.
Yeah, that
Not technically the South, but like you're in the
it's
ballpark.
it's down there.
I would love for one of you to just get a map of the US and just draw for me a shape around what the South is, because I have such a nebulous concept of this.
Where I work is technically considered the Midwestern region of this store chain. What the No!
No, not a
Kentucky,
fucking
we border a
chance.
state on the East Coast. What do you mean Midwest?
Yeah, Midwest has always confused me because it's like, don't you just mean middle?
That's it.
Yeah,
Basically, just it's like how some dumb motherfuckers will tell you that, like, oh, once you get 50 miles from the coast of Pennsylvania, you're in the Midwest. No, fuck you, you're not, motherfucker.
you need to have a moment of education. Do I have something I can draw on this map with? Does preview let you do that?
Look, you work on that, all right, and we'll
Yeah.
pick this back up. I'm going to go into my number two. Um, so the biggest cultural focus I suppose I've had this year. I mean, I listened to a lot of music, no question, and it's been a great year for music. I've said a lot. I feel like I've said like a broken record how good the last 3 months in particular have been for music. But I've also spent a lot of my increasingly limited free time playing video games this year, like Jake. And we already talked about one of the great games of this year, Mouthwashing. But I actually haven't had a chance to play very many 2024 releases. I've spent so long just playing. This year, I got a PS5 in January. So my year has been like, I have all these games I want to play that already have existed for a while that I haven't been able to play, or that I haven't played. So now my year has been catching up with so many of those. And like I played Death Stranding, for instance. I played Shadow of the Colossus. I played Sekiro. I had never played either of the Last of Us games prior to this year. I played those. Bloodborne. I mean, I had a lot of, but yeah, and I played the first three Silent Hill games, and I played the first four Resident Evil games in remade form, and had a great time with all of those. But the only real 2024 release that I completed, apart from Mouthwashing, was the DLC to Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. which I spent 50 hours playing in the June, July period. I think it was actually mostly in June. It was like there was a period about the week after it came out where if I wasn't at work or sleeping, I was playing this. And so it would be factually inaccurate for it not to make the top three things of this year for me because it was all consuming. The experience I had in this DLC, um, like this was the most like richly connected I felt to an open world in any kind of game. Because as much conversation as this has had for all of its, major combat and boss encounters, which are largely amazing, the world itself of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC was what really captivated me. What really is the reason why I ended up spending 50 hours in this thing. Because I was motivated by the beauty and the richness and also just the secrecy of this world to want to explore every inch of it. And the beautiful and original and surprising thing about Shadow of the Erdtree is how its world is constructed, how it uses verticality, how it takes the standard open world format, which is that you have a map and you get to explore, and kind of flips it on its head by using verticality in a way such that the map only shows you about half of what actually exists. And you have to kind of navigate and figure out essentially how to get to the sub levels essentially of this sort of tiered world, and discovering that through playing it, like with no expectation of how that would be what it is, because Elden Ring kind of has verticality in its layering, but not in a huge way. Whereas the DLC is just kind of like that is how it is constructed. It's like a layer cake, basically. Except you have to like find the one spot on that top layer that lets you kind of go underneath and discover a whole new area, a whole new kind of plane of the world. And that to me was like one of the most thrilling artistic, experiences with a piece of art I had all year. It's just really it made the world feel alive and it made the world feel real in a way that I wasn't expecting. It wasn't a lot of criticism for Shadow of the Erdtree has gone on the fact that there are large expanses in the land that don't really have much stuff in them. And I kind of think while I understand if that is an experience that leaves someone disappointed, it also sort of misses the point of the world design of the DLC and what it kind of wants you to do with it, essentially, and how it wants you to navigate it. Elden Ring and its DLC is a kind of like encapsulation of this, is about grand sort of landscapes that kind of unfurl in front of you, essentially, and it can feel daunting, but it's also exciting. And also what this DLC does with color as well, in particular, this was something Elden Ring did too, where the different zones of the world have this distinct color palette that makes them feel very, like it feels like a very cohesive world in the sense that it's continuous, it's not broken up like in all that much in terms of you have to walk to get to this next part of it, but it also uses color and visual effects to create distinctive feelings within the different parts of the world. And that's just something that Shadow of the Erdtree really doubles down on in a way that's quite beautiful. And one of the things that's really nice about video games, I've found, compared to movies in terms of where like popular cinema and popular games are at, is that popular games seem more willing to do like interesting and beautiful and rich things with color than popular movies are. And I'm painting with broad strokes here. It's not true of all popular movies. It's not true of all popular games. But generally, when you think about a lot of the major big studio, commercial hits of the last couple of years, you think of a desaturated color palette that's quite bland. And that doesn't mean it has to be the be all end all of whether the movie's good or bad, but it is an attribute that seems to be a trend in Hollywood. Whereas if you look at games like Elden Ring in this instance, you have such a like rich vibrancy to the way the worlds are colored and the way the lighting works as well. It's so saturated, like the colors are sharp and bright, and there are dark areas, but you feel the edge to the coloring. Like you feel the like yeah, it's saturated, it's memorable, it's like distinct, it pops, and it gives like a real evocative feeling. And that's one of my favorite things about Elden Ring in general is just how like evocative it is to be in the world and look around. It's not just relying on like awe-inspiring, shocking sights to make you go, holy shit. It's actually evoking feelings with the atmosphere. And the DLC does that beautifully. And I'm getting really abstract with it now, so I'll tie it up there. It's an amazing DLC. Like I haven't even talked really about the combat. I've alluded to it. It's amazing. It's great. Some of the best boss fights that From have ever created, and some that make you want to tear your fucking hair out, and some that are both of those things. So
Yes.
yeah, wouldn't expect anything less really from Software. Um, this From Software have kind of dominated my year in a huge way. I started this year playing Dark Souls for the first time. That was December of last year, which was a huge moment. Loved that game. Kind of pulled me down the rabbit hole, and now I've got the platinum trophies for Bloodborne and Elden Ring, and I'm very close to getting the platinum trophy for Sekiro, and then I'll circle back to the Dark Souls games as well and do those because yeah, that's been a fixation in a huge way. But so next year, this is all to say, I really want one of my big goals for next year in terms of games is to play new releases, like actually play 2025 games. So, well, it's catching up on some 2024 ones. Hello, Astrobot and Black Myth Wukong. You're waiting. I started playing Balatro this morning. I played a couple of hours of Balatro. That game is a lot of fun. Uh, I don't even I don't even know how to play poker. This is how like alien Balatro is to me, but it's really like it's well designed, it's got great systems, and very, very fun so far. So yes, expect a lot more of me being able to actually keep up with the conversation around games next year, because that's a big priority for me. Is to kind of and like I played Death Stranding this year. I'm in the process of playing Ghost of Tsushima. Both of those games have sequels coming next year, so I want to be on the ground floor for those. So yeah, that's kind of a big theme of the year for me has been sort of immersing myself in that space. And in like the Elden Ring DLC for me kind of sums up like the max level of that experience.
Cool. Now back to what's important. This
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
is
Yeah.
the South. What the fuck is that?
What
Okay.
the goddamn hell?
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
this
Yeah.
is Florida.
so why
Never the twain shall meet.
so why is like Arkansas not in the South, for instance?
Because it's the Midwest.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a very Midwest state in my head.
I just wanted to get a sense for the vibes that
It's
kind of.
it's
They
that
see
group of like North Dakota from Arkansas is like that's the Midwest to me.
And I always thought
yeah, over to
Texas was a
like
South state.
Oklahoma.
Okay, yeah. So Texas, the parts of
Texas is
Texas that
like
are the South
Florida.
are like here.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
For
the
me,
South of
like
Texas.
You
what I
looks like you've just drawn a catastrophically deformed penis.
and that is exactly what America deserves, a catastrophically deformed penis.
That's what
well,
Florida
that's
is.
basically yeah. I was gonna say.
Interesting.
Also, of
Okay.
note, there is no state that wishes it's part of the South more than Missouri. They are not.
Yeah.
They desperately wish they were.
Geographically, spiritually, no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I see.
Kansas,
no,
Missouri, and Oklahoma's main export is the mob.
know your
See,
role.
I definitely wouldn't have thought of, not that my opinion means fuck all, but I definitely wouldn't have thought of Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas as Midwest. Like
Oh yeah.
my
Those are like the
perception is
main
that
ones.
was like more north, but I don't know.
That's like the almost South. Like you're within a stone's throw, but
Okay. Interesting. Now this just
Yeah,
fascinates me.
it's like
Yep.
this.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
This is the Midwest
Yep.
spiritually. Um,
Just
East
excluding.
Coast. Oh, excuse me. East Coast is all that. This is the Northwest. This is the Southwest.
Yeah,
This is Mexico.
I agree with that.
Glad we can all agree that is Mexico.
Now that
Interesting.
we've got the important things cleared up.
All right. I think it was
I,
your.
I I was gonna say I think it's fair to assume that there's probably going to be a little bit more game content on this channel now that Riley and I have locked the fuck in.
Mm.
Um, that said, let's take things back to music for my number two. Kind of an obligatory thing. But too fucking bad. You're gonna hear about it more. What was the biggest thing in music that happened this year? Are you scratching your head a little bit? You thinking what could this possibly be alluding to? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the biggest cultural happening in music of the decade so far that naturally happened on the year where we decided to kind of take most of the year off. So number two is Kendrick Lamar. Not anything specific, not a song, not my favorite thing. It's just
Monster!
let's take away my and this podcast's collective affinity for the work of Kendrick Lamar and just talk about how nice it was to have music matter in a way that felt, analogous to how we actually talk and feel about art regularly, is that a lot of it comes with the addendum of like, this is a big deal to us. Like, this is a big important thing that is happening in very specific pockets.
In loserdom.
Yeah, I was gonna say because we're a bunch of fucking nerds who care about a bunch of very specific things, so it's important to us. And this was a moment that lasted pretty much all year, really, from like that to now, where the sustained cultural relevance of Kendrick Lamar has reached an all-time high yet again. I feel like this is the fourth time you could reasonably say that, and it was just nice to have stakes. It was nice to see things matter. And in a year where it really did feel like every bad guy won, it was nice that one guy who, and there's a lot of complicated feelings you can feel about this kind of thing, but one instance where overridingly, where no matter who won, the right side lost. And that was nice to see because everything has felt like it is on a express train to nowhere in the last 3 years. And I'm not trying to diminish art when I say that because it has been art colliding against capital and the inescapable forward thrust of time. It has been these two forces smashing into each other, and nothing has been allowed to stick. It's always been about what comes next. It's about what's on the horizon. It's about not looking and examining at what's in front of you. It is about constantly consuming. It is about all this shit. So it was nice that everybody was forced to sit the fuck down, get up, genius, look at those lyrics, and actually engage in some legitimate fucking artistic interpretation for once that extends beyond shouting sales figures on Twitter at each other, that extends beyond, oh my God, my queen ate in this one instance, or oh my God, this band was such a serve. And I'm not saying that like those instances of language are bad. I use them frequently, but it is nice that for once, the big deal that we make music out to be was actually the big deal that we made it out to be. And lest we forget, I feel like the popularity, the cultural conversation, the buzz around it distracts from the fact that this yielded a ton of great fucking music. Like I I really don't understand people freaking out about that initial Future album Beyond the Kendrick disc because it's like a pretty unremarkable Future album, honestly. Like it's solid, but
It
like
was a vehicle for that moment. And I think
yeah,
that
it
everyone
was
realized that.
It was a car that they snuck like that into and drove effectively into a Walmart where it was set on fire. But like that, that's fine. But then we actually get the disses. Lost in the minutia is that we did get probably the best music out of Drake of the last 5 years, which isn't nothing, but also we get the surgically designed, incredibly artfully made disses that Kendrick made, which even calling them just straight disses almost kind of like misses them for how beautifully constructed they are. And I'm sure that whoever's listening has heard endless amounts of Kendrick glazing this year and have probably grown sick and tired of, just how much of a genius everybody says he is. And I get it. I do. It's really like, especially if you're not into his music. Like, I, of all people, understand what it is like to constantly be told that this thing that you do not get along with or that you do not particularly understand is like this big important thing. I get it. That happens all the time with me. So if you're in that unenviable position of just not even really caring about this, my sympathy goes out to you. However, pull back from the people that are enjoying themselves and let us fucking enjoy ourselves because A, this kind of shit does not happen often. B, it doesn't happen for very long. And C, we are all rallying around the creative surplus of one man. Like we have locked ourselves so into like the idea of like ideas like being cringe and being online and like spending too much time online and like all these things when it's just like it is perfectly normal to celebrate work that you love and understand. It's perfectly normal to share that with people. And we've gotten to this point culturally where the fact that we're dwelling on it for even more than a single moment has already gotten swaths of people being like, it's all to talk about. It's all, and people like doomsaying and all this. And I'm just like, this is like the one good thing that happened this year. The one good thing. Is it an uncomplicated good? No, absolutely not. Nothing is, but especially not this. There's a lot of shit in the music industry right now that is going topsy-turvy, and it is fucked, and it is nasty, and just gonna put it over here for the time being. We're not gonna shield ourselves from it. We're not gonna ignore it. We're just gonna put it right here, maybe until the end of this year, because strategically, Kendrick waited until the very end of the year to drop GNX, which really does kind of feel like, yeah, it's the victory lap. But this is also an album where it's like, again, the cultural dissection going on here and the amount of forethought in the bars. This is far more than a guy just talking about how cool he is, which, yes, it is a lot of that. But writing off GNX is Kendrick Lamar writing out the moment and nothing more. You're being intellectually dishonest with yourself if you're convincing yourself that is nothing more than that's what it is. But I think it's fair to say that after Mr. Morale, it's all right to like people maybe were concerned that like maybe Kendrick's finally at a downward trend. Like not to say that he's any less artistically like relevant or even artistically kind of like as like captivating. Not to say that Mr. Morale is like
Well,
any lesser than his great work, which album's actually grown on me pretty substantially over the course of the past year because it's aged so well. It's fair to assume that before this year that it's possible that Kendrick had hit his peak at Damn. That, that like that was as big as he was ever going to get, won the Pulitzer for that. And that, like other great artists before him, he'd probably just kind of phase out a little bit. And this year proved that that is not the case and will not be the case for the foreseeable future. And collectively, I think celebrating that is worthy. I'm not saying that it's all great, and I'm not saying that this is the most unalienable good in the world, but I am saying that I didn't think about anything this year more than I thought about this. I didn't talk about anything more than I talked about people with this. It is something that has occupied my brain space, kept me distracted, and has, legitimately led down to some constructive avenues of thinking, and has gone for me changing the way that I look at the way that people move and the way that I move when I listen to music. So, it's been a valuable learning experience on top of just enjoying the fireworks and celebration of watching, this, lyrical guy absolutely demolish somebody. it's been gratifying to see on a grand scale in the same way that August's pick for wrestling is interesting to see take place on a grand scale because it's about a narrative. It's not about two guys who are angry at each other and are saying mean things. It's about the weight that they hold as cultural figures and the importance and gravity of that weight when they take that into an arena and when they fight it out amongst each other. So I get being done with all this, but frankly, I'm just glad that there were a couple things that mattered and they weren't things that made me feel like dog shit. And as a kind of addendum to this, I want to add in the content of one Mr. FD Signifier to my list because I have basically been watching him in tandem with how this has come out, and his Drake versus Kendrick video is like, I mean, if that's a documentary, that's like at least a 4-star documentary. It's fantastically thorough and like really insightfully made. So go check out his shit if you haven't already, even though judging by the success of it, you probably already have.
What I'll add to this is, as thrilling as the beef was, and we actually did do a pretty good had a pretty good conversation about it that made for one of our most successful videos of this year that I'm very pleased with. Well, it was just me and Jake, but it was still something that we, were able to bring in a timely way to that conversation. It was as it was happening. But what I really liked is how, honestly, the continuation of this throughout the year is sort of like it's involved Drake less and less because Drake has basically dipped off the radar for the most part. Like he's still making waves. He's got the lawsuits. He's got all the stuff he's doing, and he'll be back with music next year. I'm sure of that. But what I've liked so much about this is the way that it is just basically essentially set up the return of Kendrick Lamar and the triumph of GNX, which is a great record that has continued to grow on me. I liked it, didn't quite love it the first time I heard it. I've only liked it more and more each time I've listened to it, and I've listened to it a lot since it dropped. It's fantastically fun. It's so full of energy. It's such a celebration of camaraderie and of community. Uh, I love the fact that it is so principally about that camaraderie and about that community. Yeah, like there's some darker moments, and Kendrick talks about, this stuff that he's sort of the the war essentially that he is waged to a certain extent, and the kind of fractures that have happened and within the hip hop community a little bit in the wake of that. He talks about that somewhat, but for the most part, the record is just essentially about um, how much love Kendrick has for his people, how like the internal struggle that he has in terms of rationalizing his artistic drive and managing it in terms of like keeping himself in check. Kendrick is a messianic figure to himself and to the world, and there's a lot of, you know, uh, contradictions and complexities that go in with that. And the record, I think, for the most part, manages them really well. And it is also just a fantastically fun album. I feel like I get a different song stuck in my head all the time in the last few weeks. This week it's been Luther. I've just been like playing Luther on
Oh,
repeat over and over and over again because that
this
song is amazing.
world of mine.
And then last week it was last week it was Hey Now because I kept getting that little part from Dodie Six stuck in my head where he comes in on the song and he's just like, "Who the fuck I feel like? I feel like Joker." And is the fucking funniest shit in the world to me. For no like rational reason. It's just because like you're listening to this album, you're 5 songs deep into it. There's been no featured rappers on the record, and this beat just drops, and this complete fucking stranger just says Joker, like exactly like that. And it sends me through the roof every time I hear that song. Just the way he says Joker, fucking
Joker.
A plus. Um, that's
Ryley, you have hit upon a point that I feel like a lot of people miss when evaluating and talking about this, and that's just how fucking fun this is. Like this album, like some of these songs and stuff. Like I feel like a lot of the conversation this year has been dominated with the fact that it's like, yes, Kendrick obviously with the whole like, he's not your savior, he's idolized by many, but like he like the complicated like, yes, that's all there. Not denying that. However, also feel like we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that Kendrick, this guy who's often thrust upon with these labels being like the most important artist of the generation, which I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying that these are the labels that are constantly thrust on him, talking about him in terms of being a god and shit, and all this stuff, and about all how great his music is. This was the year where he fought against that harder than he ever has before, of just being like, oh, you want to take this to a pop place? Well, if you want to do that, let's do that. And I'm still better than you.
Yeah. Well,
That's why this is a resounding success.
and the thing that represents that is essentially the fact that, Kendrick got his second number one song ever, first being Humble with Not Like Us earlier this year. And now in the last couple of weeks, he got his third number one with Squabble Up, right? He came back into into relevance, in the major sort of commercial space with a song that is explicitly about calling Drake what he calls him.
A
And
PDF
he
file
had same,
downloader.
he's had the same level of success here in December with a song that hasn't got fucking shit to do with that. That's essentially just about fucking bouncing around, having fun. Uh, Squabble Up is like maybe the like ultimate like tent pole of the success of GNX to me. That song. It's not my favorite on the record, but it may be the most representative of the record's success and why it works. Yeah.
So I figure for my number one, I it was tough to pick what should be my number one, but I felt after I figured it out, I was like, okay, yes, this is exactly it. This is the dead correct choice, and something that's kind of in theme with the channel. A single song, actually, that is not by Kendrick Lamar. It is instead a single that. Well, you've stooged me off
August
right there,
number one,
Morgan.
The Heart Part 6.
Family matters. Uh, but no, what I've gone with for my number one is what has amounted to be my favorite song of the year. A reinvention of someone's career, something that, well, not necessarily a reinvention, but kind of a refreshing of someone's career. A song that feels timeless, that felt timeless at the moment of its release, could have been released in 1974, just as it was released in 2024. That, of course, being Geordie, Greep's Holy Holy. Favorite
Great
song of the
choice.
year, and perhaps my favorite just overall piece of media to come out of 2024. We've talked about this already, so I won't belabor the point too much. But this, just in terms of being a piece of storytelling, is ingenious. This is such a funny, hilarious song with such a classic setup structure. It is so boundlessly interpretable, both in and outside the context of its parent album, The New Sound. The performances on here are electric, memorable, from the just drumming, the guitar, the kind of classic, kind of almost Spanish instrument flavor to it, which of course for me has always evoked just the slightest skosh of the Mars Volta. This is a phenomenal song. And while I say it could have been released in 1974 in terms of just how how classic it feels, how immediate, how direct the storytelling is, it feels so contemporary to the present moment, towards the manosphere, and that is also something that's just expanded upon in the themes of the album. It works so well as a single. It works great in the context of said album. For me, this is just an electric, exciting song that feels like a shot in the ass to progressive rock, where finally it feels goddamn progressive again. It feels like something new, fresh, original, and exciting. And man, I hope Geordie keeps charging forward in this direction while, not lingering around the same thing, which I doubt it would be something he would do. Yeah, no, and also the accompanying music video to this is another
Yeah.
fantastic piece that perfectly sells the song. And like the bowling alley is such a fun visual where he's getting strikes every time, despite the fact that he's like obviously missing and making shots that would come nowhere close to their targets. It's beautifully interpretable. It is also well thought out, and it fits into the classic thing I always parrot, where it's just everything has to fit in its right place, mean something, and feel like it adds up to a cohesive artistic whole, which Holy Holy does
Yeah. It's nice
beautifully.
to see like prog music having not just having a moment, but with him, but also just like getting to be represented, like having an actual personality behind it, like someone who's distinctive as like an artistic identity, not just like. And again, I love a lot of prog bands that are essentially just like anonymous, hairy white men with pedals. That they're like, I love a lot of prog bands, but it's nice to have like a prog star. It's nice to have someone who's kind of like embracing
Mm.
that to a certain extent, even if it's with more than a little bit of tongue-in-cheek irony. It's still like it's a cool thing to have.
And
Um,
it is easy to forget, though, that a lot of the origins of Prague is in that same level. It has that same amount of kind of tongue and cheekiness to it, where even early Rush is very kind of silly and whimsical and
yeah, I mean,
intentionally
early
goofy.
Genesis like songs about fucking playgrounds and rivers and shit. Like
Mm.
it's just yeah.
So, and
Every
yeah, in that
Dream
way.
Theater album is about like some futuristic city and some weird fucking thing that happens in it. It's like, yeah,
With
yeah,
it,
uh-huh,
Yeah.
sure.
there are the sounders, metal balls that go around flying around the city producing anti-music,
That's
and it's
that's
only
not
when
that's not what a sounder is, John Petrucci. That's not what it is. My number one, unsurprisingly to anyone who has spoken to me for really any amount of time this year, is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Um, Bit of context. Final Fantasy VII was the first JRPG that I really played. It's like maybe top five Final Fantasy games for me in general, so it breaks away from the general rule of your first one is your favorite, but still a game I hold very near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons. And up until this point, my game of the decade was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Um, and after a while of contemplating that, there's some meaningful differences between Remake and Rebirth. One is Remake is sort of like a really weird sort of tailspin of the original text where it's like, oh yeah, we're remaking Final Fantasy VII, but it's like, what if we did it? What if we did it weird?
What if we did it with Kingdom Hearts combat? And it's like, yeah,
Yeah, it's like, yeah, but better. It's better than
yeah,
Kingdom Hearts
no.
combat. And it's like, what if we? It's basically the Evangelion rebuild, but for Final Fantasy VII.
It's
But
also the
not.
Evangelion rebuild, but good, but
So there's that with remake, and then Rebirth is sort of just the original game a little bit. Obviously very expanded, and it has to be an entire 80-hour JRPG as opposed to the second disc of an 80-hour JRPG. So things are expounded upon and cracks are filled in, and there's many more character moments. I think this is a flatly better video game than Remake. Um, it's one of the best open worlds ever. Every character interaction, every place, every moment in the story where they are allowed to dig deeper into the characters than in Remake and even in the original game is so expertly and lovingly done that I'm sort of baffled at the odds that it didn't turn into something that everybody hated because you're messing with something so directly here. And it's like this and Remake have had absolute universal acclaim, which proves that you just kind of need to be good when you're rebooting or remaking something. It's not, you know, it's not like, oh, people are just gonna hate it because it's new. We're like, well, no.
Hey, this year proved that pretty astoundingly.
Yeah, I also forgot to talk about in my honorable mentions Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which has resolutely proved that I don't need Spielberg to do Indiana Jones or Harrison Ford. I just need it to not suck donkey dick. So there's that. But Rebirth, I haven't gotten the platinum trophy for it yet. I will eventually. I'm looking forward to playing it on hard mode and sinking in yet another 80 to 90 hours. I'm very interested to see where the third part goes. I really hope it's more towards we're gonna fuck with shit again, and more in the style of remake than than Rebirth was. Because Rebirth is also like the second disc is the most vibes part of Final Fantasy VII. It's the most like just do some mini games and hang out with the homies and level up and stuff. Here's the Golden Saucer and Cosmo Canyon and Red 13 has a normal voice instead of his deep gravelly voice like this. He talks like a child like this. And I'm like, what the fuck? Um,
Oh, that'll be fun to get used to.
it's the most uncomplicated joy I have felt with anything in years. I was like a pig in shit with this game. Like I is the most childlike I have felt playing a video game since I was a child. And it's the everything of it. It is the fact that it is more of a simple retelling of the events of the second disc of Final Fantasy VII as opposed to the rebuild that they were doing with part one. Um, it is the fact that the emotions are relatively uncomplicated in that aspect. Um, and when the final part of the game hits, where the thing that happens in Final Fantasy VII happens, it's the same, it plays out the same way, but it's recontextualized. And it's honestly way more devastating.
Ryley,
Um,
I'm curious, do you know what Morgan is talking about right now?
Love couldn't have a clue. Not an idea.
You are very likely the first person I have ever met and befriended that does not know what happens in Final Fantasy VII. That's crazy to me. Wow.
There
does
could be.
August know what happens in Final Fantasy VII?
I just know that Super Mario saves the princess in the end.
Wow. Holy shit.
It could be a giant monkey that comes down from the moon and gives everyone a banana. And I
In
wouldn't
Final
be.
Fantasy, you would be shocked how likely that is. A lot of
Um,
shit with moons.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, it's one of my 10 favorite games of all time. I powered through most of the side content in the game, not even because it was like super intriguing, although I thought a lot of it was really well done. I did it because I didn't want to be done with the game. I did not want to
Uh,
leave. Um,
that's how
and when
you
the
know.
time fi and when the time finally came, it felt like the right time, and I got my soul punched through me like bald-headed Tilda Swinton did to Doctor Strange.
That I am patiently waiting on the fact that Square Enix has said that Rebirth will get Steam Deck support. Um,
Yeah, remake definitely has it. Um,
yeah, because
I,
I played
I,
Remake when it came out and had a very similar experience to Morgan, and then I went on my great game high. I think I literally stopped playing video games after that because I was like, maybe this is all I need. I was like, maybe the medium is done.
Like, well, probably not going to get much better than this.
And like that's definitely up there. Like it's truly flabbergasting because like if you don't know, Final Fantasy VII is the Final Fantasy for like the West. Like that's the one that made JRPGs a lasting viable thing in America and just like
It, it-
over here.
Really, it's like Final Fantasy VII is the reason that August is talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! On this podcast.
That's very true. Like I like Final Fantasy VII is to video games what Akira is to anime, in that we simply don't live in the same landscape without it.
Can you play Final Fantasy if you haven't played the
Yep,
first one,
all of
first fantasy?
well, for the most part, yes. All of
Uh, it
them are
was
different.
that was a bad joke that didn't come across. Don't worry about it.
I thought
I
you were
think we,
genuinely like intrigued just because I knew you didn't know much about it.
I
See, I
know
was
there's a
under
lot
the
of them.
impression that everyone got it, just no one found it funny.
Yeah, you can tell I didn't have any
Yep.
confidence in it, so I was underselling the delivery. Yeah,
I wasn't sure it was a joke.
yeah, that's
Um,
okay. This is why I don't. Yeah, this is why I don't talk
Here,
to a lot of people
we
in
love you
my
all the
life.
same, Riley.
Um, okay. Well, strap yourself in, folks, because I'm about to get on my bullshit harder than I've ever been before. Uh, Last year, Autechre released about 8 hours of live material from their 2022 tour. It was a small chunk of live material by their standards, but it was really exciting stuff. It was formless and strange and really kind of unlike anything that I'd heard from them before. Well, some of it was formless and strange. Then other parts of it sounded like 90s techno through a hip hop filter. It was crazy. And it was a really interesting taste because when they released it, it was titled AE Live 2022 dash, like, and it was like the dash was like it's incomplete. We haven't ended the period of it yet. It just starts in 2022 dash. And then in November, early November of this year, suddenly this release was updated with an additional 15 hours of music, and the
Whew.
title was slightly adjusted from AE Live 2022 dash to just AE 2022 dash. And this was accompanied with an interview that Sean Booth of Autechre did. I can't remember who it was with. It was with some esoteric magazine that was full of interesting nuggets about creative process and art and music they've been listening to and all that kind of stuff. But one of the big takeaways from it was that Sean revealed that they don't really have any intention to return to the conventional album format like in the future generally. Maybe they'll change their minds, but from now on, this new music they're releasing is the new Autechre, basically, which is why they dropped the word live from the release title. Not that you could really tell that it's live music anyway, because it's soundboard. It's not like a live recording with an audible audience. It's just the soundboard. But it's obviously been super like mastered for headphone listening. Um, and this additional like content drop basically consumed my life for a couple of weeks there in November. Um, and I think that, it's really hard to evaluate it in relation to anything else because it's so difficult. This isn't really something for which there's a standard. It's 19 different live performances and essentially from that started in 2022 and go all the way through to the middle of this year. And essentially what this captures is no two sets are directly alike, but a lot of what like one set will like do a lot of the same stuff from the previous night, but like add new sections or remix it or do it slightly differently. And what you get across 19 different sets is like a consistently evolving and changing piece of music. You could probably take all the individually unique sections of music on this release and have like a 5 hour thing. But what is interesting is if you're so invested, which a very small number of complete autistic losers like myself are, you listen to all of these different sets and you pick up on the differences and similarities in how a subsequent set will evolve previous material. Essentially, one set will end on a particular section, and then sometimes the next set will pick right up from that section, or more in more instances, what will happen is you'll hear the same section later in a subsequent set, and then they'll add a new section to it. very like, who cares, right? But it is fascinating and interesting, and the music's great to begin with, but also it is heavy stuff. It's heavy for Autechre. It's somehow heavy and completely like unconventional as well. It oscillates between these sequences of throbbing, massive, colossal dance music and just pure glitch ephemera. It moves around between these different sections seamlessly. There are no hard cuts within any of these sets. They functionally work as single hour-long pieces of music, while also at the same time being one like particular iteration of a sequence of music. And the all of the different iterations kind of cumulatively add up into one artistic statement of that Autechre essentially want to make. Um, it's not something you can really say, hey, to someone, hey, go and listen to this. But what you can do is you can recommend individual sets because they do work as standalone pieces of music. Um, from my perspective, the high watermark of this and one of the greatest like pieces of music Autechre ever released is the set in Lyon, France, on the 7th of May this year, which is the final set in this collection so far. I'm sure more sets will be added to it, maybe next year, maybe not. Um, that to me is like some of the most awe-inspiring music Autechre have ever made. It's also the longest set. It's almost 90 minutes long. So again, it's a bit of a hard sell. The Lisbon set from the 12th of April this year is actually a sort of condensed version of the Leon set. So if anyone's curious and wants to check out one of these sets, but doesn't want to like lose too much time to it, I would recommend the Lisbon set. It's astonishing. The Leon to me is still the high watermark. It's like, it's whatever comparison you want to bring to it. It's like it's S tier Autechre basically. Um, and this is my favorite like artistic release of the year in any medium that I've come across. It's hard. I haven't put it on my albums list because it's hard to think of it as an album. I don't even know if I do. It is like an assemblage. It is a work of it is the new creation from Autechre, and it is not even complete yet. I don't think it is anyway. Who knows when, if it ever will be. It will continue to be this thing that evolves and moves into new spaces, like with each subsequent set that they release. This is the current Autechre project. In the 2010s, they moved from a 2 hour album to a 4 hour album to an 8 hour album that was released through a live show. And now the follow-up to that essentially is this continuously evolving, musical exercise basically that's currently 23 hours in length and not complete yet. So that's where Autechre is at right now. That's the Autechre update. The other aspect of this as well is that they are live sets, right? They are like individual experiences that a lot of people have in isolation from the rest of them. So it's been really, really cool to see a community of people, some of whom have gone to some of these shows and get to relive their show through this remastered format. And some people like myself who've never had the opportunity to go to an Autechre show and get to kind of experience that. Because they do actually play these shows in complete pitch black darkness, and they will like tailor the material they play to the size of the venue, and they'll do all kinds of stuff to like really make the sound work for the space. But I would say, Autechre have been releasing their live sets ever since 2015. I would say this is the heaviest and most sort of like club and sort of historical hip hop influence stuff that they've done as well. It's been really cool to see them kind of going back to their 90s roots in a lot of ways, while also still sounding very like incomparable and futuristic and crazy. Yeah, it's like this is the kind of shit. This shit is why I love Autechre. This kind of constant reimagining of what they can do and refusal to repeat themselves, ironically in a format which is essentially a series of repetitions. But still, there is like on the macro level, it is a thing that is like moving forward. That is like something new for Autechre. And if this is the new Autechre album, I'll take it. I, I hope next year when it comes to this time of the year, I can maybe have some slightly less like predictably obvious things to shout out in this, like me talking about Los Campesinos and Autechre, fucking grass turns green. Um, But that's what it is. This is the coolest shit that I came across this year. And
Is it on streaming?
not conventional
Okay.
streaming. You can
Okay.
stream it on their website,
Oh,
and
okay.
you can also download it. But and I'm sure it's also on SoulSeek as well. But it is, the format, the limited format release. That's what it is. Unfortunately, maybe
Uh,
it will come to streaming eventually, um, but uh, but yeah, it's out there, and I think it's really neat, and that's my number one thing of 2024.
well, in tradition of me, my number one is a little complicated because it's not just one thing. It's kind of an amalgamate of things. And it is a musically related thing. Um, Interesting year for music just because like more than any other year, I really feel like this was defined like every month I really feel like I had a new definitive hyperfixation musically. And each of them were colored very differently. Like for example, when the posthumous Sophie album was going to come out, I downloaded like everything she'd ever made, DJ sets included, and just like plowed through all of that. Um, Earlier on this year, I was listening to almost nothing but Knocked Loose for like a straight month. And I came to like a point where like right before the moment I'm going to talk about now, where like I kind of took a little break from the internet earlier this year just because I needed to unplug and get away and de-stress and just kind of sort some shit out. And the music I listened to then, I thought about putting at number one on here in some capacity, but realized I was probably going to talk about it in our albums of the decade video. So I kind of pushed that aside for a little while. And instead, uh, I'll talk about what I experienced directly after that. And that is that around that time when I was still sort of on my internet hiatus, somebody that we have mentioned an awful lot on this podcast
Oh, I know where this is
dropped a book.
Yeah.
And that book is one Mr. Stephen Hayden, my favorite music writer, Riley's favorite music writer, who frequently we bring up, still one of those people who I really feel like is managing to last as like a really like predominant voice in music journalism and is like decently like respected and popular to the degree that you can be in that scene. And we've read like multiple of Steven's book before. Like I've read Your Favorite Band is Killing Me, I think is like if you want to recommend a music book to someone, to like your mom, give them Your Favorite Band is Killing Me because that's like, really famous rivalries and feuds, very entertainingly explained through a very personal lens. Um, and there's also Twilight of the Gods, which is basically his like abridged rock history book. All
His,
of them are great.
his Pearl Jam book from, I think, was it
Yes,
last year or 2022 it came
last
out?
year,
That
last year,
that
year before.
that
But
book is amazing because it's like a Pearl Jam discography breakdown, but it's also the story of the band and so much more. Like it's like,
it's
yeah,
kind of
if you
like an
go in,
even
if
better
you go,
version of the Pearl Jam documentary,
yeah,
almost.
if you go into it just expecting him to talk about the albums, you'll be disappointed because it's about the story of Pearl Jam, and
Yeah.
I love that book. That book is
And
great.
and that's what Steven's really good at, is that he's really good at blending like his own sort of personal lens and also just kind of evaluating and breaking down what albums are from a very broad kind of perspective that we as like music people like to slot albums into. He's got the same kind of brain that we operate with. Um, and the book he released is a book about an artist that we've only really talked about on here in an extremely limited capacity and not in ways that are super flattering to said artist because the only video where we've ever like talked about this person is way early on back in 2020
Yeah.
when we did a review for Bruce Springsteen's album Tunnel of Love, which is sort of commonly concepted as like that's the end of Bruce's Imperial era. It's still got a lot of like really beloved singles on it and people really love it. We weren't, just because that album is very much an album of two distinct halves in terms of the quality of its songs, but that is a discussion for a different day.
I I I
Because
I I am not proud of that review personally. I feel like we did
I
that a bit of a disservice.
in the respect that in the respect that it's just an early version of Us, I kind of agree, but I also like my thoughts on Tunnel of Love itself as an album have not changed. So I can't really say that that it like bothers me substantially, but what did bother me is that when reading this book of his, there was nothing you could do, which is more broadly, it is his Bruce Springsteen book, but it is mainly centered around Born in the USA. But it's not like just about it. It is very overridingly about Bruce as a cultural figure and is a little bit more about Bruce from the perspective of Bruce and the perspective of a fan. He talks about perspectives a lot in this, and it talks about like, the strange dichotomy of Bruce's fan base, where it seems to, seemingly contradictorily consist of a lot of really left-leaning people and a lot of really right-leaning people, and he leans into why this contradiction exists to begin with. And there's a lot of fascinating stuff. Like Steven is always a great writer, but you can really tell when he's writing about something that really personally means something to him. And that was the case that I got with the Pearl Jam book, is that you can really tell like Steven's love for Pearl Jam bleeds through every single word. And that's very much true about Bruce as well. Like his thoughts on everything are as imperative to this book as everything else. And it's just a great book. It is, the best thing I read all year, and it is an insightful look at one of my favorite artists and an artist who I've been endeared to since my childhood. Since that second grade vacation in a Toyota Corolla minivan to Florida, where my mom put in Born in the USA, and that was basically the only thing we listened to on the way there. And ever since then, I've been a fan. And this served as like a point of like inspiration for me, because it's just like I've definitely listened to a lot of Bruce Springsteen in the last couple of years, but never like very rarely is it an album beyond like my top three. Like it's probably not gonna be. It's like it's if I'm going to listen to Bruce, it's probably gonna be Nebraska. Fucking hot take. That's my favorite, but like is what it is. However, I was like, there's a lot of his albums, specifically after Tunnel of Love, that I just like haven't heard. So I need to listen to all of his records, just because there's a lot of albums that a lot of people are willing to call underrated. And the only other time we talked about Bruce on this podcast is when we kind of offhandedly mentioned one of his newest albums, which is Letter to You, which is kind of like, you listen to that album and it's just like, no, him and the E Street Band, they're in it. They're in the
They
studio.
go
This is
hard as fuck
Bruce
on that album.
Springsteen. What now?
They go hard as fuck on that album. That album's good.
Yeah, like there is a lot of like long-standing appeal in Bruce's catalog, specifically in that back half. I mean, like there are a lot of people who tell you that The Rising, Steven included, is one of his best albums, and that's sort of his de facto 9/11 record. But I had like needed to go back and explore all of these albums, and for about a month straight, I was listening to Nebraska almost every single day, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. Like I was moving through at least another one of his albums every day, as like that and like Born to Run, which got the 10 bump from me this year, just because I don't know why it wasn't before, but who knows.
Yeah,
Um
just to briefly interject, I came to the conclusion earlier this year that that is the greatest album ever made.
and like I can I argue against that? Absolutely the fuck
It
not.
certainly has all the fucking characteristics of
It,
the greatest
it,
album ever made. Fucking the title, the cover, the fucking the songs.
When
even
Thunder Road is not your best song on an album, that's probably the best song, the best album of all time.
like I legitimately in like it was maybe even this realization that led me to make this declaration, but the final minute of Jungle Land is like the greatest piece of rock music of all time. Like I it can I think of one better? No.
I
No, I
love
can't.
when bros are just like,
Exactly. And it's just kind of Bruce just doing that thing, and I feel more than I've ever felt at that moment. And that was when I came to the definitive conclusion where I was like, I've waffled between who my favorite solo musical artist is for years. It was Bowie, it was Steven Wilson, it was, it was a number of people. But this year I firmly and definitively decided no, it's Bruce. Like going through his classic albums again, listening to shit like it's like what Morgan said, like when Darkness on the Edge of Town isn't even debatably your second best album, what the fuck? Like, far hard to say that I'm surprised that the biggest connection I made this year was with an artist whose most like relevant work was 50 goddamn years ago, which I mean just definitively proves that internally, no matter how many fucking zoomer ass albums I latch onto on this goddamn show, just proves that I'm an old goddamn man no matter what I do. But just doing that, like his music just it took on a new layer of meaning for me. It was like it was music that I appreciated before, but now it's music that I feel. I listen to Nebraska and that album is just like it's a southern gothic folktale series of stories and I'm so involved in it, just like the experience from his music from a textural level and from the text of it is both rich and fascinating and deeply impactful. And I'm somebody who listened to Dancer in the Dark growing up, and I heard lyrics like I'm still in this town trying to write this book. And I think about that today to motivate me to get off my ass and write this book because that's the first person that told me to do that. And I feel like that, it's not a coincidence that that was incepted that long ago and eventually led me to where I am today. And I'm extraordinarily thankful for that and thankful for Bruce's music and how it's like impacted me and how Steven really like let me have a window into something that like no matter how much you think you love something, there's always the possibility that it can, that it can deepen substantially even, which I no better showcase than the phenomenon that like when listening to Nebraska so much this year, I decided that like saying you have a favorite song when you listen to as much music as us is like, that could change in an instant. That said, I don't think I at least like love or appreciate or feel a song more than I feel with Highway Patrolman by Bruce Springsteen, which if I had to isolate one piece of media that affected me the most this year, it's that song. It's Highway Patrolman. It's just a story about a guy and like his brother and just like the incident that fractures the two of these men after they've grown up together. And the way it ends, if you haven't heard it, is so fucking haunting, especially when you back up with the song that follows it. Like there's so much I could say about Bruce's albums, those sequencings, those songs, and I want to one day. Like I think that he would be a great artist to do a retrospective on, or like I would like part of me wanted to do a worst to best, but I almost feel like I would be missing out if I didn't share in evaluating that music with other people just because I want more than
I
just my perspective.
I would have to, I would want to get in on that because I have so
I
much.
I feel like
Maybe
I
like
feel like
a
maybe
maybe like a tier list in the style of our fast food video would be
I
best.
I actually figured that the smartest thing with it to do would maybe to be a discography breakdown in three parts over like a long period of time where we do, phase one, phase two, and phase three of his career, which I think are pretty fairly delineated into a decently even
And
number of
that,
albums.
and that
But
would also give me time to listen to all of those albums.
yeah, well, Ed, we don't have to do much prep for part one because I know those
No,
albums pretty goddamn well now. Um, but even then, it's like I rediscovered how much I loved The Wild, the Innocent, and the East Street Shuffle, which like always been an album I've really liked. But I love how like Dylan-y that album is. Like that's his blonde on blonde kind of
One of
they
like
s-
very
my
they
similar.
still they still play in Rosalita to
one
this
of
day.
one of my like favorite memories ever was playing that for a girlfriend, I think, it was for her first year of uni, and just like putting that song on. Rosalita came out tonight, and she was just like,
Uh,
"Holy shit!" Like halfway through it, she literally just said, "Holy shit" to me. I was like, "That's it. This is what the f
Shuffle.
is." Um,
Bam! I got his ass on a poster, literally.
One of like the most iconic ass shots of all time.
And you
Period.
know what? What's fucking insane? What's fucking crazy? You listen to performances of him and the E Street Band on tour right now, today. Front like you can listen to the recording that just came out recently, and they sound the same. They sound like they're 30.
Yeah. Mm.
That's the power of music, man. That's all I got, man. That's just
There's a
that's nuts. That's
there's
nuts.
a there's a clip of Jungle Land being played in I think in 1975 where it gets to the saxophone and Clarence Clemens is on the saxophone and Bruce takes a step back and he turns towards the drum set and he just has this look while Clarence is playing just like
It's
and I'm
like
like he
that's
gets
my
it.
look. That's oh, and not to mention, one of my most anticipated movies of the near future is going to be the Springsteen movie that is
I am
coming out starring Jeremy Allen White that is about
I am
him making Nebraska.
I am on my hands and knees. Please do not let that suck.
I will be devastated if that's anything short of very, very good. Like everything about it just seems set up to be like it's about Nebraska. Like that's like the perfect story to isolate for Bruce. And like I don't really think I would have picked anyone better than Jeremy Allen White to play him.
One of my favorite aspects of Stephen's book is the way that it really highlights how Nebraska and Born in the USA were made in tandem. Like
Yeah.
they were worked on at the same time, and it was this kind of like it really showcases these two different kind of directions that Bruce has pulled in artistically.
Hmm.
Not valuing one necessarily more than the other, but just a kind of a showcase of where he's at this particular point, his whole career kind of building upward. And these two potential sort of directions, these two visions of retreating and of actually kind of allowing himself to explode. And it's like the narrative of that is such a compelling idea that the book captures really well. Um,
You know, the reason why I brought that up is because when I needed to pull away from everything, I listened to this music and it was like, it was my vicarious way of being like, this is how I surround myself with things that make me feel like I'm near my friends. It's like it's therapeutic kind of in a way. And it helped me at a very pivotal moment. And I'm very thankful for that. So yeah, I mean there really couldn't be anything else that was my favorite thing this year. It's just all these things that happened in like one of the worst moments of my year that made it less so. And I'm very thankful for that.
it really illustrates how, we're capable of recognizing greatness in art at any time, but for something to truly like connect on a deep level, it has to meet you at the right point in your life. It just has to. If it doesn't, it
Mhm.
won't. It doesn't matter how great it is and how great you know it is. It has to meet you at the right time or be reintroduced to you at the right time to make that leap, basically. And that's one of the things that's not to be too grandiose about it, but that's one of the things that's beautiful about being alive is that you get to experience those moments and you never know they're coming.
It's why celebrating things in this way, kind of like it's sort of like this is just the way things went, just because this is the way the year has gone for us. But it's why I'm glad we're not just relegating celebrating things that are like exclusively new or exclusively in the medium of music, just because,
Mm.
our horizons are, far, they've been broadened beyond just that. And it's nice to, take a moment and appreciate something that isn't just like thrust in front of you because of the immediacy of the moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, we've gone long on this one. Who could have predicted that happening? But let us know if you're
What,
still
us
with us.
talking for a long time? Never. We're always
We
succinct.
are famously very short-winded.
Yeah, putting the
Hmm.
suck in succinct.
Oh, that's
Uh,
funny to me because I kind of am famously short-winded.
And you know what? That's one of the things we love about
Hey
you.
man, look, I got cirrhosis of the liver, so that makes me very short-winded after a long run.
When you picked up your drink at the beginning of the episode, I was really worried that it was going to be another 40. And just I'm glad I I'm glad it wasn't. Even if the 40 is in your fridge or something.
Shout outs to being on medication that means you can't drink anymore.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
It's a good
Damn
thing.
shame.
It's good to have a reason not to. Um,
That is a sentence I feel like I've said to myself a lot this year is it's
I
good to
didn't
have a reason not to.
I didn't mean to sound so grim there. It wasn't even a grim thought to me. It was just like, you know, um,
I mean, most of the times this year that I've been hammered, it's mostly like, is this even good?
yeah.
Right? Half the times I have not been like, I have been intoxicated in some form or another this year. I've been like, is this all there is? Is this why we're here? To suffer?
I keep thinking of this tweet that I saw months ago that's just like having 3+ drinks in your late 20s. And it's a picture of Tiger Woods with the quote, "The fire still burns to compete. The difference is the recovery of the body is to do it is not what it needs to be."
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
real.
Look what's
Yeah.
So
staring
fucking
down,
real.
look what's staring down the barrel at you, August.
Yeah, I'm oh boy, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Very excited.
Um, Anyway, let us know at home, as Jack said at the top of this episode, if you're still with us, what were your favorite things, moments, events, pieces of media, anything of 2024, and celebrate with us the highlights of this generally wild and difficult to describe year, and look forward with us as well to 2025 and whatever lays ahead there. We will be back again soon enough to discuss our favorite albums of the decade so far, a podcast encapsulating reflection that I think is going to be emotional, to be honest. To think about all the stuff, the music that we've shared together
You will
over
see
the
new
past.
albums, you will see old albums, you will see albums from all about the channel, but what you will most definitely see is the four of us back on your computer screen for another episode of Jams and Tea.
Your expectations couldn't be laid more plainly than August just did right there. That's exactly what you're gonna get.
August is all about managing expectations. Just like
Mhm.
just don't get your hopes up here. You'll see
Calm
us
down. Calm down now.
there, and that's all
And and
we're
and
promising.
there's beauty in that, truly.
That's true. That's very true.
August, why don't you sign us off?
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Chuck E. Cheese, where a kid can be a kid.